The workday was over. People were going home, and the exhausted 27-year-old Akayugi was slowly shuffling across the crossing, wondering whether to return to the village. Suddenly, someone shouted to him to be more careful. A truck was speeding right in front of the hero. People were shouting for him to move away, but Enika realized what had happened too late. Alfred immediately recognized the girl as his sister-in-law. "Leonora," he whispered, sitting down on the grass and scratching his eye. The boy explained that he was just dozing. Leonora asked if it hurt. Alfred was only 3, and Leonora was already 9. He replied that it was from sleep. The girl frowned and crossed her arms over her chest. She asked if her mother had taken him for a walk yet, and then wanted to add something, but looked at her brother silently. Leonora's gaze fell on the house. She asked if everything was okay. Alfred also looked in that direction. Leonora grabbed his hand and told him he had to go. His mother was worried. Alfred apologized quietly. His sister looked at him carefully. She said he looked tired and asked if he was okay. Then she added that he was only 3 years old and looked more tired than an adult. Alfred sighed inwardly. He was indeed tired, having worked as a clerk in his past life. Suddenly, the boy remembered the training magic he had used earlier. It seemed that he had weakened after using magic. Alfred thought that a little rest would fix the situation. He looked at his hand. Leonora had advised him to exercise his body sometimes. The girl smiled and said she did it with the best of intentions. Alfred just looked at her silently with an expression of surprise. "You're a real demon," he muttered. Leonora ignored him, pointed her finger in the direction of the house, and told him to hurry up. There was magic in this world. The god, whose age could not be determined, said that this was not Earth. He explained to Anaka Yuju that he had died in his world, and that after death, according to earthly rules, many processes take place. God addressed Anaka Yuju with news. His soul accidentally fell into another world. He himself had never encountered anything like it. Returning back was impossible. The hero bowed silently, trying to comprehend what he had heard. God added that instead the hero would be reborn in this new world. This statement stunned him. Anaka wondered if he really wanted to live in this world. It was full of monsters and dangers. God touched his forehead and reassured him. There was no need to worry. Anaka was shocked. Could God really read minds? God confirmed that he is the God of this world. People who look like earthlings live here, but demons roam among them and attack. Science is almost undeveloped, and everything relies on magic. The hero repeated in amazement, "Magic." If reincarnation is truly possible, Enika would like to live in peace. But is it possible to have peace in a world of magic and fantasy? He remembered his past life. God had promised him a rare gift, an exceptional one. As the first foreigner here, he was entitled to something special at birth. Enika wondered what exactly God meant. Enika nodded. It seemed that even after death he had no choice. God sadly agreed. Rebirth was inevitable. The hero decided to accept it with joy. He dreamed of a happy life in the new world. God was surprised at how quickly he adapted, calling him carefree. Enika asked who he would be reborn into. God replied that he could become a crown prince or the son of a nobleman. After some thought, Enika chose to be reborn in the body of a child. God agreed. It would be as he wished. Before saying goodbye, the hero thanked God. God noticed that he had neither dreams nor ambitions, so he decided to give him another gift: the ability to use ancient magic. Enika was shocked. He asked if he could really use magic. God confirmed, in this world it is possible. If he wants, he can rejoice. Joy filled him. Dreams of soaring into the sky, controlling monsters, casting spells. It all seemed real. But he stopped. Monsters couldn't help with everything. The hero asked if there would be a place like a village. God placed one hand on his shoulder, the other on his forehead, and his eyes lit up. It needed some time. Enika found himself among the clouds, pondering what power he would like to receive. It was difficult to choose. He wanted powerful magic, healing, and protection, but the thought of rest won out. He wanted peace, not strength. Perhaps this was his true opportunity to use magic. Enika decided he would live in the village as the son of a lord. But the question arose: what difficulties would await him there, and how would he overcome them? God replied that the level of culture in Koliat corresponded to the Middle Ages. If the culture is so primitive, There is almost no transportation. The hero realized that there were no bicycles or cars here, and thought about magical journeys. He got up and turned to God. He asked where he had stopped. The god waved his staff and assured them that this magic was perfect for rural life. He asked Inaka if he was ready for the new world. The hero resolutely answered yes. Inaka thanked God for everything. The latter said with a smile that it was not necessary to thank him. It was time to say goodbye. The hero was enveloped in a whirlwind. Otherwise, he did not fully understand what was happening. Everything was amazing. A peaceful life in the village awaited him. Thus, Inaka Yuji was reborn in another world. The hero opened his eyes. He was a baby. There was a bright light all around. The village of Polyat was located in the kingdom of Midfield. The second son of the local feudal lord was named Alfred Lovelight. He was 3 years old. Alfred thought it was great to be able to walk on his own, although he still fell sometimes. He remembered himself as 27-year-old Inaka Yuji from a past life. In the past, he was an ordinary clerk who died in an accident. The moment when a truck ran over him flashed in his memory. Thanks to God, he received a new life in a world where true magic existed. The Lovelight family consisted of a father, mother, older sister, and brother. Despite his childish body, Alfred possessed the consciousness of an adult. Every day, listening to conversations, he gradually learned the language of this world. Memories from the past helped him learn to crawl and roll over early. His mother watched in amazement as the baby grew. But not being able to walk, he was helpless. He couldn't even read a book without permission from his elders. His fascination with books about magic must have seemed strange to adults. But practicing spells while lying in bed was impossible. He remembered his mother opening the window and saying that the wind was nice today. The baby just purred in response. Alfred went into the library. He wanted to finish reading the continuation of the book. At that moment, someone greeted him. Silvio said that Alfred was a quick learner and assured him that he could always ask questions if he didn't understand something. Alfred thanked him, mentally admiring his calmness and maturity. He seemed extraordinary for a 6-year-old. He even looked more mature than his older sister Alina, who constantly dragged her brother to training. Alfred took out the book he was going to read. Silvio seemed kind and balanced to him, which he really liked. Looking out the window, the hero noticed the weather was nice. Maybe it would be worth visiting the secret base after lunch. He shouted the spell teleport, and the pebble flew up. The pebble disappeared from his hand and appeared on the table in the yard. Alfred was delighted. He tried again and again. Pebbles, twigs, stems, everything worked. It was incredible. He thanked God in his mind. Even the shoe teleported away. Alfred felt tired. All the objects were on the table. The magic could now be controlled. The hero exclaimed in surprise, "Why is God here?" The god coughed and said that it was just a dream. He apologized for the intrusion and noted that the hero had been successfully reborn. God asked if Alfred was happy, and added that he hoped he would study spatial magic. The hero remembered his mother, but ancient magic required enormous power. The god admitted that Alfred did not yet have enough for even the simplest spell. The hero was indignant. God hastened to reassure him. Everything was not so bad. He promised to teach him a way to increase magical power. The hero breathed a sigh of relief. But shouldn't this have been explained earlier? He remembered how, from his childhood, he had devoted himself to magic to the end. He was consumed by a true fascination. The hero realized that with such strength, he wouldn't have to worry about cleaning or carrying things. And most importantly, he would have a better chance of escaping from his older sister. Alfred felt a little sad, because she was one of the reasons. As he left the house, he saw his shoe fly over his head. It was time to start learning the rules of spatial magic. He approached a large stone, examined it. It seemed to be coming closer. He tried to lift it with his hands, but no matter how hard he tried, it was too heavy. He tried again. This time it worked. Alfred was in a hurry, so he threw the stone and shouted a teleportation spell. And in an instant the stone was on the table. It was a real success. It's logical. The bigger or heavier the item, the more mana it costs. This rule has become obvious. Now the hero decided to test the magic on something living. He noticed a beetle on the bark of a nearby tree. He picked up the insect. At first he thought it was a rhinoceros beetle, but he immediately realized it was a different species. He named it the willow beetle and told it that it would be the first living participant in his magical experiment. He threw the beetle up and uttered a spell. It disappeared and appeared above the table. Alfred grabbed it enthusiastically and praised it. At that moment, something tapped on the head. He turned around, another beetle looking like a spoon. I tried to teleport the plate, but the attempt was unsuccessful. It was difficult to control. The plate appeared in the air and fell to the floor. The sounds of impact came from the next room. He had only managed to teleport an object for the first time 2 months ago. That was when he began to feel how it worked. Al was sitting on the windowsill with a plate in his hands. It had disappeared and appeared on the table. Now he tried to put it back, without success. I understood. He can only move what he has physical contact with. It is impossible to teleport part of an object or a person. Therefore, destroying something through it will not work either. He wanted to test it on people, but first he needed their consent. He teleported the plate again. Alina ran into the room. She called her brother's name, and he could barely hold the saucer. She asked if he could make something cold because it was hot outside. She meant ice. Alfred was indignant. She could have at least knocked. Alina replied that nothing terrible had happened. Al told her to remember the door next time. She promised, although he didn't believe her. "Why did you hit me?" he exclaimed. Alina said he was making up something suspicious again. Al reminded her that he was her sweet 3-year-old brother. She asked how he knew the word irrational. Al realized that he had been stabbed. He justified himself by saying that it was from a book. Alina didn't listen to the explanations. The main thing for her was to get the ice. She held up the plate and repeated, "Ice." Alfred sighed. It was hard being her brother. He created an ice cube that fell onto the saucer. In this world, ice was the pinnacle of water magic. In a hot environment, any cooling was appreciated. Alfred did not stop training. It was hard, but he succeeded. Alina looked disappointed. It wasn't the ice she wanted. Al was surprised. "Isn't that what you meant?" she explained. "Last time it was crunchy and fluffy. You mean the one that looks like crushed iron?" he asked. The girl nodded and smiled. Alfred said that he had many skills, and to be called a blacksmith, you had to at least know how to create it. They walked over to the table with the saucers. Alfred began to cast a spell. There was no other choice. Ice crystals began to appear in the air. Alina was delighted. Crushed ice formed in the saucers. Alfred announced that everything was ready, and added that he also had spoons. Alina declared that her brother was ready for anything. She was filled with joy. Al, meanwhile, was thinking about how to use these spoons to practice teleportation. Al took a portion of ice and headed to Silvio. Alina sat down on the sofa and started eating. She exclaimed that it was crunchy and so cold. Al asked if she knew how to make it even tastier, and offered to tell her. He smiled slyly. "You should eat a lot at once, not with small spoons. Then the taste will be richer." Alina went up to him, wanting to say that it was a waste, but Alfred interrupted. It was just a way to enhance the taste. If she didn't believe it, let her check it. She agreed. If it didn't work, he owed her another portion. Alfred assured her that he would make as much ice as she wanted. He left, and Alina began to eat quickly. The cold made a characteristic grimace on her face. Alina screamed. It felt like an ice knife had been stuck in her head. Alfred ran over and, laughing, said it was revenge for that slap. Alfred ran to the library and handed Silvio his portion of ice. He watched as he enjoyed it. Bartolo, the cook and servant, was also there. He said he was back today. Bartolo was both chef and servant. Alfred asked to give him some time in the kitchen. He was surprised. Did Al really come not only for goodies? Al replied that he wanted to cook something himself. "Do you even know how to cook?" Bartolo asked. Alfred remembered living alone in Japan and answered in the affirmative. Bartolo narrowed his eyes in surprise. Alfred clenched his fists and nodded confidently. Bartolo was silent for a moment. After a pause, the cook agreed. Al looked serious. He warned Al not to go far because he couldn't let the child get hurt. Then he asked what he wanted to cook. Al said spaghetti. He asked if they could be boiled. Bartolo asked again, surprised. Al imagined Japanese rice as he watched the ice cubes rise. The hero explained, "If there is wheat, it can be made into a staple food. And with spaghetti, you can also expand your culinary repertoire." Bartolo was delighted. It sounded interesting. He suggested quickly gathering the ingredients. Alfred mixed the ingredients. Bartolo was nearby. The guy prepared the leaves instead of parchment. Then they went to the garden to get tomatoes. Al rolled out the dough into strips, and the cook watched him carefully. The dish was ready. Bartolo enthusiastically noted that such a taste could spoil the boys, although Alina grimaced. "Female power does not explain this." Al thought that competing with her was a different kind of magic. The chef sighed. The first impression is good, but I want more beauty in the presentation. However, now the taste is more important. Al tied his apron. Time to taste. He tried the first one. Delicious. Especially the sauce that Bartolo made. It went perfectly with the pasta. Alfred looked at the cook, wondering what he would say. Bartolo tried it and exclaimed, "Incredibly delicious." Then he solemnly addressed him, "Mr. Alfred," and promised that in 3 to 4 days he would create a pasta that would surpass this one. Alfred was scared. Al asked to be called by his old name and promised to come into the kitchen more often. Bartolo was delighted. 3 days later, the Lovelight family was stricken with spaghetti mania. Alfred decided that his new goal was to expand the family menu. Alina trained with Silvio. The guy was inferior to her in strength. Alfred watched. He saw Alina trying. On the other side was Silvio's brother, and later the father of the family came over. Al remembered how Silvio didn't like fencing. The guy thought that you had to defend yourself because it was important. In fact, Silvio was more interested in reading and learning. Al respected that, because that was also a strength. His mother sat down next to him. She asked if he wanted to practice with the sword. Al replied that he had just come to watch. After all, peace is the best. His mother laughed and asked if he liked the peace and quiet. Alfred was embarrassed. He thought to himself that he resembled an old man. His mother said that since childhood, he had been more interested in magic than in weapons. Al agreed and ran to practice after every book. His mother smiled. Alina called her brother. "Training is over. Now we can play." Alfred grimaced. His mother noted that his sister was just fire. Later, they were by the river. Alina asked what they were going to do. Al was throwing pebbles into the water. They didn't fly far. The strength of a 3-year-old's body was making itself felt. Meanwhile, his sister was making up something. Al decided to strengthen his hand with magic. The stone flew far away. Alina's eyes widened in surprise. "Wow!" Al exclaimed. The stone bounced off the water 8 times. Leonora asked in amazement, "How is that even possible?" She grabbed her brother by the shoulders. She was filled with delight. "That's cool. Teach me," she exclaimed. Alfred asked if they were talking about throwing rocks. Al got out of her hands. He said that first we need to find a flat stone. He showed us exactly how to throw it. Alina nodded attentively. She tried again and again, but the stones just kept splashing into the water. "Why doesn't it bounce?" she laughed. Alfred thought she was really having fun. He handed her the perfect stone, thin and flat. She agreed. That makes sense, and decided to try again. Alina gathered all the strength in her hand and prepared to throw. Alfred thought, "You can really expect anything from your sister." Her reflexes were impressive. Then he wondered, what if there were fish in the river? Alfred was walking along the riverbank. He thought how beautiful it was near the village of Koliat. The water was clear as glass. Alina called out to him, asking what he was doing there. Al tried to get away with it, saying that Alina had already finished shooting arrows. He suggested that they try fishing. She asked again, but Al understood that he had to beat her to it. Otherwise, he would suggest swimming. When it came to his strong and unpredictable sister, she was always one step ahead. Even if she teleported far away, she would still find him. Once he hid in a cave. Alina found him immediately. Her intuition told her where he was. Al then thought, is she really a person? Alina thought about fishing, but said it was boring. Al immediately objected. She just didn't understand what a noble cause it was. He called her a child, and remembered that he was still a child himself. Alina ran to get the fishing rods, shouting that she would bring them all right away. Al was surprised how quickly she agreed. And wasn't she thinking only of herself? Al remembered that he wanted to run to the pantry to get some salt. He opened the door and saw a man's figure. He said, "Finally got it." It was Bartolo. He was holding a can. Al came up from behind and asked what he was doing. Bartolo was scared. The can almost fell. He managed to grab it. When he saw Alfred, he asked him not to scare him like that again. Al denied that it was his fault and asked what was in the jar. Bartolo replied that it was sugar that an old friend had sent. At that moment, Sarah, the maid, came in. She asked what they were doing here. Bartolo thought, of all people, it was Sarah. He started to squirm. Al wanted to say something, but the cook covered his mouth. Al realized he had to intervene. He called Sarah and said he was looking for fishing rods. She replied that Mrs. Alina had already taken them, and Mina was helping to deliver them. Al grabbed the plate that was behind him and mentally teleported it. Sarah looked around in surprise. Something was wrong here. Al turned to Bartolo and said that he had to hide the jar immediately, and that now he owed him. He would have to share the sugar. The cook sighed heavily, but agreed. After taking some salt, Al returned to the river. Alina won the fishing competition. Al decided that it was unfair. He thought it would be better to leave the tragedy with Bartolo's sugar for later. Alina was screaming that they had hidden the sugar somewhere. Bartolo stopped her. But Al was calm. He had a spacious storage room. He lay under a tree, enjoying the summer breeze. The weather was pleasant again. The air was so fresh, despite the heat. Al remembered how unbearable the summers were in Japan. He thought that country life was the best. Bartolo came up to him and asked why he was smiling so strangely. Al was scared. He sat down, recognizing Bartolo. Bartolo sighed, still alive from his adventures with the sugar. Al remembered witnessing the crime scene when Bartolo tried to hide it. After escaping from the demon girl, they decided to celebrate in secret, with pancakes and sweets. Al loved sweets. But they were interrupted. The maids immediately sniffed everything. One said she smelled something sweet. Another asked why they hadn't been invited. And another reminded them that there wasn't any sugar in the pantry last time. Bartolo suffered terrible female revenge. Al also did not escape punishment. He was scolded by his mother and older sister. Al asked Bartolo if he had any more sugar. Bartolo got angry, grabbed the boy by the arm, and carried him away. At that moment, his mother called out that she had heard the word sugar. Mom really heard it, and Mina the maid confirmed it. It was the word sugar. Alfred asked if there was anything left. Bartolo nodded. There was still some. Al was delighted. He wanted to cook so much. Bartolo added, "I wonder what will happen next." Al noticed that for the first time the chef was really excited. Alfred didn't know what to do. He thought maybe he'd read, but his mother called him. "I don't know anything about this place," said Al. Mom was surprised, but she explained that she wanted to show him a magic trick. She had once promised to teach him everything about magic. Al agreed. He hadn't practiced yet today anyway. The weather was nice outside. Mom asked what kind of magic he wanted to use. According to the test, he had the elements of water and earth. Al confirmed it and added that he was already training 8 attributes with spatial magic. Mom asked if he could show her anything. She said it could be any spell. Alfred nodded and began to cast a spell. A chair grew out of the ground. Alfred announced that everything was ready. Mom froze in surprise. "Where's your spell?" she asked. Al explained that he recited it in his mind. He'd learned it since he was a child. Mom nodded in understanding. "Show me something else," she asked. Al agreed and began to work his magic again. The ground split open, and glasses appeared from it. Ice formed in the air, which immediately filled the dishes. Alfred took both glasses in his hands. The vortex that had been created by magic had completely disappeared. Mom couldn't believe her eyes. Alfred came over and handed his mother one of the glasses. He said that he had been using such spells a lot lately. She thanked him and admitted that he had control of 4 elements, including ice. Mom said Al was a true magical genius. Even she couldn't teach him more. They needed to review their training program. She said she was proud of her son. A little later, his mother and Alfred went to his father. He asked if Al wanted to go to magic school. Al politely refused. He wanted to enjoy his childhood. At the Lord's estate, someone asked if everything was ready. He was told not to worry. His father said that Al was right. At the age of 4, the feudal lord's son had to take a tour of the village. Such was the tradition. He asked if Al knew anything about it. The boy replied that his mother had already explained everything. The village was close by, a 10-minute walk. The forest where they had thrown stones was to the right of the estate, and the clearing to the left. Al realized that to teleport, he needed to have a clear picture of the place. After visiting the village, he would be able to instantly be transported there. Mountains loomed on the horizon. They were everywhere. Al repeated the word several times in his mind. Lush greenery covered everything like a carpet, and the road was wide and comfortable. He was glad that everything was like that. Alfred smelled the spicy aroma of herbs. He liked the smell of the earth. That's why he loved country life. His father looked at him in surprise. A week later, the boy returned to the forge, where a finished frying pan was already waiting. Alfred sincerely thanked Logan. Al mentioned rice. He had recently read that something similar grew on the eastern continent. The book described this legendary grain, but the hero of the book never told what the rice was like. Al then got very angry and threw the book on the floor. It was called Adventures in Dumfries. Al asked loudly why the hero didn't tell anything about his adventures with rice. His father called him. The village was already in sight. Al asked what crops were grown here. His father replied, wheat, barley, rye, beans, and various vegetables. In addition, chickens, sheep, and even cows. Al admired the view. The peasants in the field noticed the Lord and called out to him. They were sincerely happy to see him. One of the villagers started telling him about the spaghetti recipe. It was so delicious. It was impossible to stop eating it. Al thought, that's what these villagers are like, simple and sincere. His father said he was glad to hear that. That's true, the Lord nodded. But my son is a real oddball. Alfred rolled his eyes. His father added that it was time for them to continue their tour. The villagers were invited to return any time. One of the men patted Alfred on the head, saying, "You'll grow up to be strong like your father." Al replied that he'd better not be distracted by his wife while he was working. The man blushed. "How do you know that?" he exclaimed. Al understood. He guessed correctly. The other peasant just sighed. It was too late to worry now. And he answers so calmly, seriously. "Are you 4 exactly?" the peasant wondered. Meanwhile, father and son reached the village. They found themselves in a market. People were selling vegetables and food. Alfred noticed that trade here was mostly done through barter. The boy's attention was drawn to the mushrooms. They were bright, colorful. It seemed to him that they could be dangerous. Traders also sat in the square around the fountain. Al noted that the exchange indicated a certain economic freedom. His father agreed. Without freedom, many peasants would not have been able to survive. But barter only works when people have both the means to live and the means to exchange, his father added. Alfred nodded. It all made sense. The headman approached them. He greeted the Lord, who responded. The headman assumed that this was young Lord Alfred. The Lord confirmed it. The headman took off his hat and said he was glad to see the boy healthy. He asked if he liked the village. Al replied that everything was wonderful here and the people were cheerful. The headman was delighted. The headman asked the Lord what he thought. He replied that the harvest was better than last year. You could see it in the happy faces. The headman agreed. The stable weather and abundant harvest had helped them survive the winter without any casualties. Alfred remembered that the winters in this world were quite harsh. The headman asked the Lord to discuss a few matters. He suggested talking at his home. The Lord agreed. His father asked Alfred what he was going to do. He said he wanted to explore the village a little more. His father allowed him to, but he warned him not to go too far. Alfred nodded. While the Lord and the headman went off to have a business talk, Alfred went shopping, ingredients, spices, wood, and other things. He was delighted. Thanks to spatial magic, Al could freely store and retrieve items from his personal vault. Time didn't move inside, so food didn't spoil. He thought he might as well start keeping a list. This magic seemed extremely convenient. Alfred supposed that any merchant would dream of such power. His father called him. Al ran over and asked if they had talked yet. His father confirmed. He asked if anything had caught his son's attention. Al remembered the vendor who sold rainbow mushrooms. They seemed poisonous to him. The father left in silence. The Lord greeted the tavern's owner, Syria. She said that thanks to the spaghetti recipe, the number of customers increased even more. The Lord introduced Alfred, the creator of the recipe. "Is that you, Mr. Alfred?" Syria was surprised. "Do you have any more ideas?" Al hesitated a little, said that he did, but there were not enough tools and products. Syria advised him to contact the blacksmith Logan. He is stubborn, but a jack of all trades. Alfred's eyes lit up. So unexpectedly, his first visit to the village gave him a chance to get some kitchen tools. Syria promised to talk to Logan. Al thought that now that he had a teleporter, it would be even more interesting. The guy decided to start by sawing the boards into squares and then cutting out an 8x8 field. Then I carefully cut out the chips and finally painted one side black. After a while, the game was ready. Al remembered the saying, "Easy to learn, hard to master." He looked at the created field. The seemingly simple game turned out to be profound. His older sister, Eleanor Sloulé, ran up to him and began to ask what he had done. Alfred began to explain. "To capture a chip, it must be between 2 of yours. In the end, the one with the most chips wins. Eleonora got the point. Alfred asked if she wanted to play. She agreed, took a chip, and promised to paint the entire field her color. Alfred let her make the first move. Eleonora was nervous, but at the same time threatened that she would not spare him. She was confident. When the game was over, she said that she had driven the chip into the corner, so it must be hers. But the chips turned black. Eleonora abruptly stood up from the table and exclaimed loudly, "How could I lose?" Al calmly announced the score, 56-8. The girl bowed her head. Alfred became worried. But suddenly she raised her head and exclaimed that the game was incredible, and she wanted another game. Al agreed. They played 3 more times, and Alfred won each time. He even offered to give up, but his sister stubbornly wanted to win fairly. The whole day passed like this. Alfred was tired and said it was time for dinner, but Eleanor begged him to play again. He lost count of how many times she repeated it. A girl with long blonde hair came into the room. She said it was time for dinner and asked what they were doing. Eleonora said they were playing a game that Al called Reversey. "What kind of game is it?" the girl asked. Eleonora explained, "You have to capture your opponent's chips with your own colored chips. The one with the most chips wins," she added. The girl asked if they could put their chips anywhere. Alfred felt a strangely familiar sensation. After explaining the rules, the girl asked if we could all play together. Eleonora happily agreed. Valinor and a girl named Alina began to play. They discussed for a long time how to make a move. Alina often asked if everything was correct. Meanwhile, Alfred quietly left the room. He sat down at the table where his father and brother were already sitting. His arms crossed, his father asked where Eleanor and Galina had gone. Al replied that they were still in his room. Gently pushing back the chair, he added that they were unlikely to appear soon. His brother pointed out that this phrase was not entirely appropriate. His father asked what had happened. Alfred remained silent, and then his father decided to send Silvio to find out what was going on in the room. Al slowly objected that this was a bad idea, but Silvio could not be stopped. Al only bowed his head and muttered that dinner would definitely be later today. His father did not understand anything. After a few dozen minutes, the head of the family himself went into the room. He stood in the doorway, hands at his sides, and loudly asked what they were doing there. Alfred realized that if the game brings too much joy, addiction arises, and that is already dangerous. It was necessary to foresee everything. While he was alone, the boy decided to make another set for Reversey, because if his dad let him play, he would never see his board again. Alfred was walking down the street when a bearded man noticed him. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "Just a handyman," the boy replied. Suddenly, the man grabbed him and held him close. "I heard you made an interesting game." He poked Alfred in the cheek with his finger. "Now, you have to make one for me too." "Why should I?" Al objected. Looking into the pantry, Alfred saw that the materials were gone. He needed to go to the village and replenish his supplies. With difficulty, he broke away from Eleonora and ran in an unknown direction. She shouted after him, but the boy just dreamed of some peace. Eleonora caught up with him and suggested a walk to the lake. The weather was wonderful. But blinking, she saw that her brother was gone. He had managed to run far away. Alfred recently developed a gambling addiction, and today he returned to the village of Koliat to meet with the blacksmith Logan. The peasant woman was telling her friend something. Alfred decided not to be distracted and ran on, looking for the forest outside the city. I approached the house and thought, I wonder if Logan is here. And at that moment, I heard the clank of metal from behind the building. The house was hung with blacksmith's tools. Inside, a man with light stubble was forging something. Alfred thought Logan was right. The forge was no place for children. He probably thought he was just here to play. But Logan didn't know yet that he was no ordinary boy. Syria told Alfred, "Just say her name and Logan will surrender." And it really worked. The blacksmith immediately became interested. Al realized that it is always worth having a trump card up his sleeve. The man came up and asked what he wanted. "Will you believe me?" Al asked. "Well, at least I'll listen," the blacksmith replied. Alfred admitted that he could have just used Syria's name to get Logan to help. Logan replied grimly, "Anyone in the village who dares to do that will be in trouble. But all the boys in Syria are tough. They can't be defeated," the blacksmith added. Alfred was shocked. Just a moment ago, Logan had seemed unwavering. But one word changed him completely. Later, they were sitting over coffee. Al asked what he specialized in. Logan replied that it was better to watch than to listen. They looked at the walls, and Logan said, "He makes pots, farm tools, cutlery, and even swords. But his specialty is kitchen utensils." Alfred asked if he could make a knife and a frying pan. The blacksmith agreed to make a knife, but he didn't understand why a regular round frying pan wouldn't work. Realizing that his pockets were empty, Al quietly teleported the notebook straight into his hand. He put it on the table and drew a frying pan. Logan looked at the sketch, scratched his chin, and said that for the first time in his life he would create a thoughtful frying pan. "Do you like it?" he asked. Alfred nodded. "It looks great and will be convenient to use." "And how will you use it?" Logan asked. Al said he could show me right away if he gave him the kitchen and some ingredients. "Are there any eggs?" he asked. The blacksmith confirmed that he had salt and sugar. Logan started heating the stove and asked the boy to wait. Alfred sat down quietly. But suddenly his gaze fell on the old ruins in the house, and an idea came to him. The boy decided to help the blacksmith repair the house. There were cracks and damage almost everywhere. He used magic, and the wall became neat. Logan was surprised. "You're full of surprises." He never thought that such a child could do magic. Al replied that he only knew simple spells for now, but there was enough time, so he could help with the repairs. "Is magic useful anywhere else?" the blacksmith asked. Al replied that it was very convenient, and that's why he trained every day. Logan noted that the guy was behaving extremely maturely. "I'm often told that," Al smiled, simultaneously starting to cook something in a frying pan. Logan approached the boy and asked if he wanted to become a chef in the future. Alfred replied that he hadn't decided yet, but he really enjoyed cooking. The blacksmith tasted the dish and said it was incredibly delicious. Alfred was delighted. Everything worked out. Logan admitted that he eats scrambled eggs and omelets often, but this presentation is a real masterpiece. This dish should definitely be popularized, and probably soon everyone will be ordering square pans. Without a moment's hesitation, the blacksmith decided it was time to prepare for mass production. Alfred was glad to have received the kitchen utensils without any trouble, but he was worried that he might have created a new addiction. Logan had already asked for an omelet at the tavern. Al knew his skills in earth magic were growing as well. He remembered when he had first created the house, which had looked more like a prison cell. Since there was plenty of free land in the village, Al decided to build himself a summer house. But suddenly he felt a headache. He realized that his mana had run out. Lately he had been very tired from everything he had been doing. Syria mentioned both reversi and tamagoyaki, but Al didn't understand anything. He replied that he would rather see it for himself. "What, even a reversi tournament?" Al was surprised. The woman confirmed. "The competition is held right in the tavern, and people come from all over." Al asked if there were enough boards. Syria replied that Herman had done everything he could to provide them. Herman himself, with a tired face, greeted Alfred. The boy felt sorry for Herman. He barely had time to do everything, especially under the watchful eyes of the residents. Herman said that he had managed to make the kits just before the tournament began. Syria announced that a special match was being prepared, between him and the winner of the tournament. Alfred was terrified to even imagine his opponent. "The prize for the winner is my daughter Carla," Syria said with a smile. The little girl greeted Alfred, not understanding anything. Carla and Al sat down at a special table and were given a set. Alfred was nervous. Everyone in the tavern was eagerly waiting for the game to begin. Carla shook his hand and said that she was 12, so she was much older. But she wasn't going to give in. Alfred replied that he too had the honor, as the creator of the game and the son of a local feudal lord. Carla stood up abruptly, slammed her hands on the table. "How could this happen?" The visitors applauded Alfred with victory. He was proud of himself. "You're really strong," Carla said. "But next time I'll definitely win." Al replied that he was ready for a rematch at any time. He thought, "Oh, a serious girl, just like her mother." Herman patted Carla on the head and suggested they go get something to eat. The tavern was bustling. Some were ordering tamagoyaki, others were just relaxing. Alfred noticed that the tamagoyaki was a real hit. Syria said that thanks to Alfred's spaghetti and tamagoyaki recipes, they now have a lot of customers every day. She added that there were not enough staff due to the influx of visitors, and asked Alpha to help out sometimes. He replied that he would rather teach Bartolo the recipe and send him instead. Falling to the ground, Al sighed. How tired he was, although there was still so much to do. But all this for the sake of a peaceful life. Then he decided he would go home and just rest. He had slept well and woke up full of energy. He decided to go to the kitchen. He needed to discuss something with Bartolo. But his thoughts were interrupted by a noise outside the door. "He has no ambition at all," said a voice. Al recognized her. It was the headmaid, male, and standing next to her was a girl named Mitha. He was surprised that they were discussing him. The girls were amazed by Alfred. He was already using magic, inventing spaghetti, tamagoyaki, reversi, and he was only 4 years old. They laughed, imagining what else he would create. One of them said that if you add a little sugar to the tamagoyaki, the taste will change dramatically. The others laughed, "You always talk about sweets," and asked how she knew that. Covering her smile with her hand, the girl replied that she had overheard Alfred and Bartolo talking in the kitchen. The boy was instantly furious. How dare she? Alfred came to Bartolo. They greeted each other. The guy asked what he was doing and why he needed so many eggs. Bartolo replied that he wanted to experiment a little by mixing the ingredients. Alfred told Bartolo that he had overheard Mina's conversation with the maids, and it seemed that the secret about adding forbidden ingredients to the tamagoyaki had already leaked out. Bartolo was furious. The boy warned them to be more careful. Bartolo shouted that he would immediately hide the sugar in the darkest corners. Al added, "It would be better to do it quickly." The situation resembled an underground drug lab. The kingpins of smuggling were trying to smuggle the goods out. Bartolo nodded. We had to be careful. Suddenly, a girl ran into the kitchen and asked if it was true that tamagoyaki would taste better if you added a little sugar. Alfred and Bartolo suddenly turned to stone. They hadn't even had time to hide the white gold yet. The girl looked at the scattered powder on the table and asked if it was sugar. Bartolo lied in fright that it was salt. She politely apologized for being intrusive, but the girl did taste the salt with her finger and quickly bit into it. It was real sugar. Al and Bartolo were speechless with shame, but she, smiling, declared that she felt with her gut that there must be more sugar. Bartolo lied that there wasn't any more here. She got caught up in the word here and concluded that there was more somewhere. There was no sign of trouble. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves. The streets were quiet. Alfred introduced himself. As he talked about studying arithmetic, history, and etiquette, the boy remembered Eleanor moaning in the next room as she struggled with humanity's most terrible enemy, mathematics. The girl screamed that she didn't understand anything and how it had happened. Alfred thought that mathematics was a real demon. Alina ran up and said that Eleanor was learning fencing quickly, but she replied that she wanted to become the best and not be inferior to anyone. Alfred made a mental comparison. Silvio's brother was much cooler than Eleanor. After all, Silvio pretends not to understand anything, and Al is incredibly jealous of him. While reading in Nature, Alfred told Silvio that many girls were interested in him. The shy brother just shrugged it off. It was all an exaggeration. Alina said that if he solved the problems, he would be exempt from lessons. Alfred beamed. That was exactly what he wanted. Alina began handing out assignments. Alfred got some challenging examples that she hadn't even seen before, and Eleanor got the same problems as last week. 5 minutes passed. Al picked up the sheet. Ready. But as soon as he stood up, he was grabbed by the collar. Sarah grabbed him and said they had to check the answers first. Al muttered quietly that he hadn't noticed her in the room. When Eleanor checked the answers, there were no mistakes. Alfred was excused from the lesson. Eleanor was furious. Her brilliant brother was once again in the spotlight. The boy was walking down the hallway, dreaming of fresh air, when he met his father. He asked if he had finished his lessons yet. They went outside together, and Al reminded them that they were supposed to have fencing practice today. His father replied that it was never too late to practice. Alfred thought that although he was making good progress in magic, he needed to improve his sword. His father advised him not to strain his hand, but to lower it gently. After a series of punches, the father praised his son for improving his technique a little. Al, breathless, thanked him, but mentally said, "I wish I hadn't done that." He was angry. He would have to train again. He sighed heavily and muttered that he really didn't want to go to daytime practice. Meanwhile, the practice battle between Eleanor and Silvio was about to begin. Father waved his hand. "Let's begin." Eleanor immediately rushed forward, hugged her brother and asked what was wrong with him. Silvio just stood there in silence. The guy tried to hit his sister, but Silvio grabbed his head and screamed that it hurt. Eleanor turned to Alfred and asked if he wanted to play. Al was furious. He didn't want to be involved at all. Alfred was glad that everyone was calm and having fun, an ordinary peaceful day, and that was enough for him. Wandering around the house, he thought that today he would start making a swing. But suddenly he noticed something strange. An unfamiliar old man was sleeping on the floor, right in his house. Alfred had no idea who it was. One eye was covered by a black bandage. His face was covered in scars. It seemed the old man wouldn't wake up on his own. Alfred decided to shout, "Lunchtime!" Maybe that would work. And indeed, the grandfather jumped to his feet and shouted, "Who said it was dinner?" Alfred was surprised that he had woken up. The old man rudely asked who he was. Alfred replied that it was better to be more polite, because the man was sleeping in his house. The old man looked around in surprise. He hadn't realized it was someone else's house. Alfred reminded him not to disrespect someone else's home. The boy introduced himself, noticing that the old man was interested in the furniture. The man said his name was Rumba and added that he was pleased to meet you. Seeing Alfred cooking, Rumba praised the atmosphere. "The guy is cozy here." Then he said that he didn't see a bathroom here. Alfred asked if he washed at all, because the house smelled. He gave him a mug of ale. Rumba thanked him. At least they know what hospitality is here. He couldn't believe he was holding an ice-cold drink in a village like this. Scratching his beard, he remembered that the princess also had a connection to ice magic. Alfred asked if he had come from the capital and handed him a plate of spaghetti. Rumba replied that he had heard about spaghetti from a merchant he knew named Trilla. Alfred recognized him as a frequent visitor to the village. The boy remembered how he once heard that a girl had brought Sarah sugar. It turned out that she had found a secret door. Alfred was shocked at the time. Trilla did indeed solve the mystery, and Sari thanked the boy for the find. Trilla apologized to him for a long time afterward. Alfred remembered how they had taken away all his sweets for a week for that. Next time, he would definitely tell the merchant everything to his face. Rumba asked what had happened, but the boy replied that everything was fine. One day, not knowing where to go, Trilla advised Rumbi to visit the village of Koliat, so he came. Alfred was surprised. It rarely happens that adventurers come to them. The village is too far from the capital. Rumba confirmed. He did not expect to have to walk so long. The boy asked what he would do next. Rumba replied that the village was peaceful and cozy, so he wanted to live here for a while. Alfred asked where he was going to stay. Rumba replied that it was here because it had a kitchen and a bathroom. The boy agreed, as long as he took care of himself. The old man asked in surprise if Alfred lived here. The old man replied that this was his second home, and his main one was somewhere else. Rumba was shocked. Such a big house, and it belongs to a child? Rumba asked where the main house was. Alfred explained that it was a feudal lord's estate, a few steps from the village, and he was the second son of the Slollet family, a name that seemed familiar to Rumba. Alfred added that his father was a feudal lord named Nord Slollet. Rumba exclaimed, "So that's the Dragon Slayer." The boy replied that the nickname sounded funny. Rumba said he still remembered his heroic appearance. Alfred added that his father probably remembered Rumba too. Such bright people are not forgotten. And Al himself knew. His father had been a famous adventurer in his youth. He just never went into details, because of that awkward nickname. Suddenly, Rumba grabbed the boy and begged, "Take me to the estate." He needed help. Alfred thought of Eleanor and imagined the couple together. The thought was terrifying. And now they are sitting in the manor room, where the old man is carefully examining every detail. Alfred sighed. He had to bring him here because the old man's face was too pitiful, and he wouldn't have escaped from his clutches. Alfred's mother entered the room with a smile on her face and cheerfully asked, "Who's visiting us?" Suddenly, Rumba jumped to his feet, pointed his finger at Alfred's mother, and exclaimed, "That's the same magical girl who's in love with Nord." At first, the woman didn't understand what was happening. Alfred was scared for his mother, but suddenly her memories returned. She remembered Rumba. She blushed and covered her face with her hands. Rumba laughed, so she recognized him. Alina, mother, replied that it was impossible to forget such a man. Alfred looked and did not recognize her. She was not like that yet. He thought that perhaps this was her true nature before she became a noble lady, and she still looked no older than 30. But Rumba reminded him that Alfred was still here and could hear everything. Mom leaned over, thanked him for his company, and suggested they go into the living room to get some candy. Alfred smiled. Mom trying to maintain her dignity in front of her child. The boy noticed that she looked very cute with her caring face, and the mother immediately made a worried face again. Rumba laughed and patted Alfred lightly on the head. The boy was happy. He just wanted to see his mother like that again. Smiling, Alfred headed down the corridor, imagining candies with his own name on them. But his father stopped him as he was about to greet the guest. Dad suggested they train together. After talking to Rumba, he felt his fighting spirit again and wanted to do his best in training. An angry Alfred asked if his father thought today's training was too much, and if yesterday's joke about the Dragon Slayer had anything to do with it. His father ordered him to get up and continue. Alfred was sure that his father was getting back at him for the nickname he had called him the previous day. And then he saw his mother, in sports clothes. It shocked him. Alfred was glad. Since Eleanor was busy fighting Rumba, she would finally have a day to herself. But the father wouldn't let go. He said he would see if his son could dodge, and he added, if he couldn't, the sword might accidentally hit him in the head. Alfred decided to make a joke too. No matter how many times he was hit on the head, he would still remember the nickname Dragon Slayer. His father smiled. Both were silent for a moment. Alfred wondered if their duel was being too provocative. His father asked why he had suddenly become quiet, and in a few seconds Alfred was already lying on the ground, his sword lying aside. He didn't even have time to understand what had happened. He was just breathing heavily, lying on the grass. He closed his eyes and thought. Although it didn't hurt, he didn't understand anything. He didn't even see his father move. When his father approached him, Alfred was just staring at the sky. It seemed especially blue today. The guy was completely disoriented. Who was he? Where was he? Then he remembered. He was Alfred Slollet, and in a past life, he was from Akayuji. He remembered that he had trained with his father today. And how? He remembered it perfectly. When he fell, Eleanor ran over, shaking him and asking excitedly if he was hurt. Rumba shouted at her not to shake him like that. The girl replied that she was very worried. Alfred's eyes looked empty. Rumba reassured her. He was born with those eyes. Alfred mentally asked himself, where had those anxious faces he had seen a moment ago gone? He barely opened his eyes when he saw Eleanor arguing with Rumba. She was already asking if he wanted a real fight. But Rumba noticed that the boy had come to his senses and said that everyone could breathe a sigh of relief. Rumba, pleased with his victory in the duel, announced that he would take Alfred away for the whole day tomorrow. Eleanor screamed in hysterics. She couldn't land a single blow. The girl clutched her sword and exclaimed that she would never admit defeat in her life. Rumba was amazed. So young but such a fighting spirit. But it all made sense. She was the daughter of a dragon slayer. The old man noticed how Alfred begged his father for rest, and he understood. Eleanor and her brother were complete opposites, like night and day. Eleanor called out to Rumba, "Is it normal to turn away from an opponent so carelessly? She could attack him while he's not paying attention." She warned him not to underestimate her just because of her age. Rumba replied that he had never taken lightly those who really tried. The girl sarcastically asked if he really thought he could attack her in this state. He advised her to use her advantage, agility, and train her to strike. In a serious voice, Rumba said that he had lived twice as long, so his body was trained and hardy, and thoughtless attacks would not harm the hardened warrior. Eleanor reluctantly admitted that sometimes he looked pretty cool, and it made her angry. Rumba joked that she made him blush. She raised her sword and thanked him. She was already feeling good, so she wanted another fight. Then Rumba offered a bet. The first to strike would win the prize. He turned to Alfred and looked thoughtfully, and suddenly he exclaimed, "The winner will be able to spend the whole of tomorrow with Alfred." Eleanor agreed without hesitation, but she lost, and that made her terribly sad. Rumba handed her a drink and praised her for fighting well. He smiled and happily said that he would spend the day with Alfred tomorrow. In parting, he wished her well, and Eleanor shouted after him that next time she would definitely win. Meanwhile, Alfred lay in bed, not understanding why everyone was making decisions for him. He had his own opinion. The nurse came into the room and told him that she had left him some delicious food and water on the table. The boy thanked him, and she suddenly said that if he was too weak, she could feed him with a spoon. Alfred refused abruptly. He heard her sigh and asked if everything was okay. Eleanor replied that he thought it was. He mentally deciphered, if the girl says nothing, it means that there is actually something. And if she says absolutely nothing, it means that the problem is serious. The sister folded her arms and told him to be quiet and rest. The boy smiled. He was only talking because she was there. Eleanor went out. The boy was happy about the silence. But he heard his irritated sister mumbling in the hallway that she wanted to feed him with a spoon. He heard everything. Alfred remembered how everyone had worried about him. He felt warm and happy, and it was even more pleasant to realize that today he could just lie down and do nothing, because he was just lying down yesterday due to a concussion. And in the morning, Rumba came to pick him up to take him for a walk. The man shouted loudly, "It's time to get up! He said that if his head is clear, it's time for some fresh air. Rumba wanted to explore the village, so he asked Alfred to be his guide. The boy found it difficult to comprehend such an honor, but he agreed. He told Rumba that the local wheat fields were like hugs. They welcomed newcomers and saw them off. Rumba sighed and compared the field to his own mother. Alfred smiled back. The closer they got to the central square of Caliet, the denser the buildings became. It turned out that there was a rule in the village. New residents built houses and barns further from the center. Shops and workshops were located according to needs. For example, taverns and inns were built closer to the center, where there were more people. Blacksmith shops were built on the outskirts, so as not to disturb with noise. But Logan lived there by choice. Rumba thought it was too noisy here. He was sure that if the village were closer to the capital, there would be constant crowds here. As they passed by the shop, a young man came out and greeted Alfred. Alfred was delighted and replied to Herman. Herman was surprised to see the giant next to him. Alfred explained that he was an acquaintance of his father. Rumba was fascinated by the local products and exclaimed that he had never seen anything like them. Herman smiled. All of this was his original design. Later, after tasting the dish, Rumba was delighted. He declared that Al was a real savior, because otherwise he would have died of hunger here. Stunned, Rumba remembered how he usually carried a lot of provisions with him. But this time something happened. Seeing several children near the abandoned buildings, he approached and asked if they were hungry. As he crouched down, he noticed the children looking at him in fear. Rumba told all that he had shared all his food with these children. They needed it much more. All said nothing, just listened. Rumba pointed to the empty sack. That was why he had no provisions left for the journey. As a result, he barely reached the village. As soon as he stepped into the courtyard, he simply fell to the ground. Then Al understood why he was sleeping in his house. And now, Rumba was glad to be here and to be able to enjoy delicious spaghetti. Al didn't know that there was a slum on the way to the village. He was lost in thought, and didn't notice when Rumba called out to him. As they passed the vegetable counter, the man said he was hungry again, and offered Ella something to eat. The guy smiled and agreed. Al suggested going to Siria's establishment. During the conversation, Rumba handed him a cherry, and he was surprised that he had money. But he took out a gold coin and offered the boy to pay for everything today. He told him not to worry, and suggested that things were going well in Syria. Hearing this, Rumba was surprised. How could one earn so much in a village canteen? When he entered, he was stunned. The establishment was huge. Al explained that it had expanded due to certain circumstances. He didn't even want to lose his tamagoyaki. Al noticed a sad boy at the table. It was Roland. I asked my friends what happened. They replied, "Everything is the same as before. They just played in reverse again, changing the dishes in their places." One of the men sympathetically noted that Roland wasn't learning anything, just like Logan had once. But he kept playing anyway. Rumba suddenly saw something under his feet. It was a pebble. Al explained that because of the game in reverse, the noise here never subsides even at night. Thanks to the reversal in Syria, the establishment quickly became popular and expanded. It seems that Rumba had never heard of such a game. He remembered Trilla showing him something like that. He was in the business of selling the rights to the game. Ella's family received a share of the profits, and the income increased. Interestingly, there is also a patent system in the world. Otherwise, artisans would have no protection. One of the players suggested that Rumbi play a game of reverse with him. Having understood the rules, Rumba smiled. Everything is simple. The player praised his fighting spirit, and for good reason. He suggested that they bet on tamagoyaki. Al wasn't surprised that the player was so brazen in wanting to take the dish away. But Rumba didn't know what it was. The player took the tamagoyaki from his neighbor and pushed the plate to Rumbi. Rumbi was indignant, but Roland ordered him to accept it. It was just a piece. Rumba took it without ceremony and swallowed it all in one go. The player was shocked. After tasting it, Rumba exclaimed that it was divine and asked for more. Roland said, "First, the game." Roland promised, if Rumba wants more, let him win. Rumba joked that Al should take him outside and beat him. But he explained that they had to play in reverse. Rumba focused and made his first few moves. But then he didn't understand how it happened that he couldn't make a move. There was no space left on the board. Roland smiled. He had no choice but to surrender. An old lady named Sari approached them and told them that Roland was here every day. Although the place was crowded during the day, at night the series was overcrowded. People were drinking, often fighting, and even she, a fragile-looking woman, had to break up fights. Syria didn't understand why Al smiled at her so awkwardly. He hadn't even guessed that fights often broke out here. Even her husband would hardly have dared to contradict her. The thought made her laugh. Syria gently approached Alfred and suggested that he walk with her for a moment. Without waiting for an answer, she took his hand and pulled him along. Tapping his head with a ladle, she said, "If he has the strength, let him wash the dishes." Al had no chance of refusing such a woman. Rumba shouted that the line between stupidity and genius was very thin. But the answer to his question was only one of the 7 riddles of the village. He wanted to find out the rest, but Roland advised him not to rush. There was plenty of time. Roland smiled back, and Rumba asked for more wine. Meanwhile, Al washed the dishes and couldn't figure out why he had to do it. It's been a week since Rumba has settled in the village. Al has even introduced an entertainment fee at his recreation center. The hero noticed that Rumba's base looked cooler than any local hotel. He agreed it was really comfortable to rest here, and thanked him. But Al was annoyed. Rumba stubbornly did not want to live in the estate, but behaved like a defenseless princess. Al was doubtful about whether it was worth leaving Lenora behind. But Rumba said that he had already discussed everything with Nord. The guy believed that with her, it would be possible to attack from several flanks and win quickly. Al wanted to see for himself how the experienced adventurer worked, so he went with him into the forest. Rumba's movements were silent and precise. Besides, his second base was running out of food. He didn't want to kick Rumba out, but maybe it was worth it. At least for today, the owl scared off its prey again by breaking a branch. Al wondered how such a giant could move so quietly. He almost stepped on a branch, but stopped just in time. Rumba wasn't paying attention. He was watching the boar. The boy wondered how he could learn to hide his presence in the same way. But Rumba stopped him with a giant hand. Al looked inquiringly, and Rumba warned. Something was approaching. It seemed to be a goblin. Al was surprised. They really live here? The guy assumed that he was simply lost. In general, the forest near the estate was safer, but wild boars and monsters appeared further away. One of the feudal lord's duties was to protect the people from monsters and bandits. Therefore, they hired adventurers or created a surveillance squad. Al saw a short monster with pointed ears and recognized it as a goblin, like in the books. Rumba guessed that the boy was seeing the monster for the first time, but Al replied, he had seen it before, albeit from afar. Once he met a snow-white wolf, nicknamed Windy. Then he miraculously managed to escape. Then he learned that his father and his gang had set out to kill him. Rumba joked that his father must have given him a beating, but Al reminded him that he was the one who led the local gang. He tasted the food and praised it. Everything was cooked perfectly. Back to the topic, the goblin was small in stature. They often carry crude weapons, like rusty blades. This one was holding a wooden stick in his hands. Rumba suggested that Allah try fighting the goblin. The boy froze. He couldn't believe that the 6-year-old really wanted to fight the monster. The only chance was to use magic. Rumba had just remembered that Al specialized in magic. Meanwhile, the goblin turned sharply. It seemed that he had noticed them. Rumba pulled out his giant sword and warned, "Don't come any closer. It could be dangerous." But when he turned around, he didn't see Allah nearby. The guy was already hiding behind a tree, and Rumba wondered why he had moved so far away. And then he scared the hero. Grinning ominously, he rushed towards him. Al understood. This man really wants to drag him into battle. Realizing that there was no other way out, the boy began to form magic balls in his palms. Directing his magic upwards, he shouted to Rumby, who was about to attack the goblin and didn't want to hurt him, to back off. Al stretched his hand forward and fired with the force of the ballista. A bright flash illuminated the goblin, who was confused, and stopped. When it was all over, the boy approached the goblin's body and noticed its severed arm. The blood was purple. Definitely not human. Before that, Al had only hunted rabbits and wild boars because that was the feudal lord's duty. Hunting was a routine, necessary for survival. There was no room for doubt. It was inevitable. The moment flashed through his mind as his magic instantly tore off the goblin's arm. Al said quietly that it was a bit absurd, but Rumba just smiled. The boy's magic was just as absurd. The boy smiled and said that he dreams of using magic for everyday life, not for combat. No matter what the world was, life was always precious. And, as before, Al didn't think fighting was for him. After that, he and Rumba headed back to the city. One sunny day, the hero decided to cook something delicious. The sound of knives clanging could be heard in the kitchen. Al was trying to make a juicy steak out of ground beef. He asked the assistant where the fried onions were, and he brought them over immediately. Bartolo also brought over a bowl of ice. The guy gathered all the ingredients: minced meat, onion, breadcrumbs, egg. He added salt and pepper and started mixing with his hands. The ice was needed so that the minced meat wouldn't heat up and spread from the warmth of his hands. Since the patty needed to hold its shape, Al decided to use his legendary technique. Bartolo couldn't believe his ears. Al had learned this from his mother: toss the minced meat between his hands 10 times, expelling the air. That way the dish wouldn't fall apart. He suggested that Bartolo try it too. Al thought wistfully that if he had a wife, he would like to see her do it in a nice apron. But Bartolo looked at him suspiciously. A strange expression came over the boy's face. This moment reminded him of school. In cooking class, he dropped a ball of minced meat on a classmate. Al asked his assistant to make a depression in the middle of the patty. The assistant didn't quite understand, but he obeyed. Soon the fragrant cutlets were ready. Bartolo sniffed the smell with delight. Turning around, the boys saw one of the maids. The scent must have spread far beyond the kitchen. The maid resembled Alhaina. Al joked that the wild hyena lay in wait like a predator for prey. Bartolo didn't understand what animal he was talking about, but they decided not to touch her. It was time to lay out the cutlets, pour the sauce over them, and garnish with vegetables. Al suggested tasting them. Bartolo happily agreed. The dish was soft and juicy, and the maid behind her could barely keep herself from taking a bite. Al wondered how much longer Mina would stand there watching. Work was not waiting. He wanted to cook a few more steaks and even agreed with Bartolo's idea of adding cheese. Al praised the idea and suggested trying carrots or mushrooms instead of onions. That would also be delicious. Bartolo asked what to do with the leftovers. Hearing this, Mina was embarrassed and blushed. Bartolo smiled at her and offered to give her his share for future culinary practices. Al had no objection. The girl couldn't believe her ears and asked if she could really eat it. She thanked Bartolo with all sincerity. Mina sat down at the table, looking at the cutlet with trepidation. Bartolo handed her the plate, and the girl exclaimed that the smell already made her happy. But as soon as she touched the dish, Eleonora appeared, also drawn in by the incredible aroma. She thought Al was up to something again, and came to check. She asked to be served the same dish. Bartolo and Al were shocked, as if another hungry monster had appeared. Al snatched the plate from Mina's hands and handed it to her older sister. Mina was stunned. Her portion had simply been taken away. Al mentally apologized to Mina. The world is cruel. The weak must obey the strong. Eleonora was delighted and said she would share the dish with her mother. After dinner, they would gladly share their thoughts. After Eleonora left, the three of them stood in the kitchen for a long time, as if glued to the floor. Her unexpected visit had thrown them off their feet. Bartolo thought Al had suddenly changed, like he was a real aristocrat again. But he wasn't of noble birth, just a younger brother, and that was important. Bartolo asked Mina not to be sad. He promised to cook her another steak just to wait a little. She smiled through her tears and happily agreed. Al decided to forget about the sugar story for now. But he sensed a slight chemistry between the two, and smiled slyly. Suddenly, Mrs. Mel entered the room and sternly asked how much longer they planned to idle. She ordered Min not to sigh. No one has cancelled cleaning the hallway yet. And not to argue. Mina asked for a moment, but Mel pushed her in the back and led her away. With tears in her eyes, the girl cried out plaintively about her cutlet. Al waved goodbye and promised to call her when the next batch was ready. But she never got to eat the steak that day. Her younger sister and mother asked for more. Bartolo wiped the sweat from his forehead, noting that it was hot again today. Al just sighed. Well, it's summer. Upon meeting the unexpected trader, both were initially wary, but pretended everything was fine, greeting the merchant. Al greeted Try and said he was just in time. The merchant replied that it had been a while since they had seen each other. Bartolo and Al smiled and said they had been waiting for him to return. Their faces alerted the guest, but he thanked them and said he was glad to see them too. Merchants are always alert and sensitive to change, but they are not the kind of people who admit their mistakes. The hero remembered that terrible day for a long time. Tree handed over the sugar supply, and after that, he and Bartolo lived in hell for a week. Al led Try into the living room. He said he had opened a store in the capital thanks to Reversa. He had been scared at first when he inherited his father's company, but now he could relax. Tree transferred the profits from the sales into savings for the low-light family. Al didn't know the exact amounts, but once the village had enough salt and sugar, the amount must have been considerable. Try also brought in cattle for breeding. Despite his appearance, he had a remarkable business acumen. Everything went according to plan. The merchant thanked Alfred, saying that nothing would have been possible without him. He hoped for a long cooperation. Al replied that it was mutual, but now the merchant wanted to move on to more important matters. First, he wanted to rest a little after his journey. Al offered him a bath. Al went to heat the water. There were no hotels here, and a hot tub was a luxury, and the ones they had were a head taller than the ones in the capital. But when Al grabbed Tree by the clothes and demanded the truth, he almost fell. Al hoped he hadn't disobeyed. Figs. The merchant confirmed in a frightened voice that he had brought some. The hero shook him. How much exactly? Kilograms? Tons? When he heard that it was only 100 kilograms, he was upset. That amount would definitely not be enough for him. After all, rice is the basis of Japanese cuisine. It was decided he would grow rice himself. He would start with 1/10 of a hectare, approximately 31 by 31 meters. The harvest would be enough for his own consumption. Al, lost in thought, didn't hear Try's words. He was nervous. It seemed like the guy wasn't listening to him. Al still hoped that he had brought at least a ton. But the merchant repeated again, only 100 kilograms. The hero was shocked. That was not enough. But he pulled himself together, shook hands with Try, thanked him for his help, and invited him to a bath and then a steak dinner. Try was amazed by such hospitality. He tasted the candy, and it was clear from his face that it was very tasty. So Tree had gone from a miserable merchant to almost a relative. But now Al didn't know how to explain everything to Bartolo. In his mind's eye, he could already see himself telling his assistant that Try had brought them rice and asking them to forget about revenge. But Bartolo would surely be indignant. He had suffered the most then. Al suspected something was up, and the maid confirmed it. She had just spoken to Tree, and he had mentioned that the gentleman had a sweet guilt. The girl was hurrying to Ms. Eleonora with a report, but Al grabbed Min by the hand. He put 3 candies in her hand and asked her to take them. The girl's heart was beating wildly. She froze. Mina looked at Alfred in surprise and suddenly asked him to jump. Al didn't understand why, but Mina insisted. Let him jump like a rabbit. The hero smiled faintly and agreed. After a few jumps, there was a telltale rustle of candy from the pockets. There were more of them. Al bowed his head and remained sullenly silent. He gave her another 5, apologized, and said that was all. Mina popped one into her mouth in an instant and beamed with happiness. Al raised his hands indignantly to the sky. This was blackmail. There was no one around. No one had seen the crime. The hero jumped up angrily and mentally cursed the talkative Try. Al returned to the kitchen and called Bartolo, who said he had brought some acao pods. They were extremely hot, so you had to be careful. Al admitted that Mina had taken all the candy and apologized for his carelessness. Enraged, Bartolo dumped a basketful of pods into the mince, shouting that it couldn't be left like that. Al agreed. Let Tree taste the true taste of retribution. While the meal was being prepared, Eleonora came into the kitchen, attracted by the aroma of the cutlets. Bartolo and Al turned around in alarm. There was trouble again. She asked for 1 portion because she had just finished working out. Al handed her the steak with a serious face. Eleonora clarified. Is it really possible? The hero confirmed. It was with deep gratitude. When she found out about the ingredient, it was too late. She had already tasted it. Tears appeared in Eleonora's eyes. She grabbed the mug and drank the water in one gulp. Her gaze became dangerous as she glanced at her brother and Bartolo. If this is his thank you, then she understood everything. Al was confused and began to fumble with his explanations, but he said that his sister was like the spice of life, because she was the most fiery person he knew. Bartolo covered his face with his hands, and Al tried to comprehend what he had just said. Eleonora repeated that she understood his feelings, and in response simply shoved the remains of the cutlet into his mouth. Al felt his consciousness cloud over. A burning taste, as if the cola had gone the wrong way. In a moment, the hero fainted, and Try, meanwhile, received ordinary food, not revenge. But Al promised. His revenge is still ahead. And by the way, he thanked for the rice. One day, while washing his face, Al received a towel from a maid named Sarah. He thanked her. She asked not to thank him. It was her duty. And Al knew that Sarah was always sensitive. She had looked after him since childhood. She must be about 22 now. The hero involuntarily glanced at her black hair. He remembered a recent conversation with his mother. Black hair was a rarity in this world. His mother assumed he was in love with Sarah. Al didn't understand what she meant. But his mother noticed that he always looked at her with warmth. But that wasn't the point. He just liked black hair. After that incident, Al thought that people would look at him differently now. He was already 33 inside. In the meantime, it was time to cook dinner. On the way, he met Bartolo with a laundry basket, which reminded him of the kitchen. Al changed into his work shirt and decided that since the weather was nice, it was time to get down to business. He showed Bartolo a new rice cooker, which he called Hagama. Logan had made it at his request. This thing made perfect rice. Al watched with satisfaction as the grains rose fluffy. After boiling, the heat was reduced and the rice was allowed to steep. It takes a long time to reach perfection. Then it was wrapped in a towel and carried to Alistair's storage room where time did not pass, so the hot rice could be eaten at any time. Al was infinitely grateful to Logan. While wiping his hands, the hero remembered that Logan liked tamagoyaki, so rice dishes would definitely be a good choice. Al imagined how the combination of rice and tamagoyaki would be the pinnacle of taste. It's a shame there's no miso soup. Are there even soybeans in this world? Since there is rice, there must be beans too. The hero decided that he would find them anywhere, even on another continent. However, the sweet plans of Japanese cuisine were interrupted. Eleonora's name was heard nearby. The rice almost fell out of my hands. The crowd supported Lady Eleonora in the duel. Others shouted for the commander. The hero understood. His sister was training with the guards. As always, full of fighting spirit. But suddenly he remembered something and froze. Without further ado, run away. A wise man doesn't get into trouble. Al ran to Logan's house and called out to him loudly. He knocked on the door, promising food. An angry Logan opened it and ordered him to be quiet. Like, what if someone heard? Al laughed. No one lives here except Logan. He handed him the onigiri with a smile. The guy said he wanted to have a picnic. The weather was great. Logan looked at the sky and decided to eat the meal later. Al invited him to go with him. He refused, not understanding such an impulse. The guy just smiled. It's not fun with you. The hero knew Logan well. He would try at least a piece because it tasted interesting. So Al listened behind the door with a predatory smile. Logan, hungry, took the onigiri, wanting to know how it tasted. Al only confirmed his guess. Like the other Altsunders, Logan was sincere. At that moment, the door opened and an angry Logan came out. There's a grain of rice left on his cheek, so it must be delicious. He just won't admit it. Al admitted that the estate was running low on rice, so the series wouldn't be able to serve this dish. Logan agreed that it would go well with the tamagoyaki and asked for more. As he said goodbye, Logan admitted that it was delicious. Al wasn't even surprised. Raising his hands to the sky, Al decided it was time for a real picnic. After walking through the forest, the boy looked admiringly at the waterfall, and then past a quiet lake. Would Logan go with him if Al insisted? The thought wouldn't let go. Al basically had no friends his own age. All his acquaintances were adults. It was frustrating. Disappointed, he decided to invite his brother Silvio for a walk. Maybe he would agree to read outside. The girls recognized him from afar. It was Mrs. Eleonora's younger brother. One of them, Mr. Alfred. One of the girls sat down in front of him and asked to be called Emma. She smiled, and Al introduced himself as the second son of the Lovelight family and thanked him for taking care of his sister. Emma was delighted. It was the kind of courtesy she had expected from Lady Eleonora's brother, and Sheila wondered if it was because of his noble birth. Her older sister grumbled that he was just pretending. Sister Emma seemed very nice to him, perhaps even admired him. First impressions are formed in 10 seconds. So, a little flattery, and she will become his admirer. The second girl, Sheila, smiled as she greeted Alfred. He politely replied that he was pleased to meet her. As a man of 33 years of experience, Al noticed one aesthetic moment when Sheila leaned in. His thoughts were dangerous, so he shifted his gaze to his sister's chest and sighed with relief. Everything was safe here. Sheila asked what he was planning today. Al said he was going to find a nice spot in the mountains and have a picnic. The girls were thrilled. The weather was perfect. Eleonora apologized and said she would ask Bartolo to cook them dinner. The girls happily agreed. Bartolo's cooking was a real treat. When Bartolo heard about the bento, he was surprised. There might not be enough ingredients for 4. He hadn't had time to replenish his supplies yet. Al thanked him for his effort. Finally, the whole company went on a picnic. Eleonora remarked that despite being summer, the air was fresh. Emma agreed, feeling a pleasant breeze. Emma reached out to Al. The slopes here are steep, and she wanted to make sure he was okay. He smiled. He said he was fine. Angrily, Eleonora reminded him that Al had been fencing for a long time. Such a slope was a trifle for him. Emma apologized and removed her hand, and Al was sad. His sister had ruined everything again. Emma was embarrassed. The calluses from the wooden sword were unpleasant. Al didn't understand what she meant. Sheila explained. They had been training in the guard for 2 years. Emma admired Lady Alanora, who kept up with the guards and wielded her sword skillfully. The girls also dreamed of becoming as strong as her. They clarified that Al only started training in the spring. His sister said that he trains every day, although his father and she are very insistent. Alanora confirmed that this is normal. Sheila's stomach was growling. She suggested they stop and eat. Emma asked for patience. They were almost there. But Sheila couldn't wait. The bento smelled too good. From this place the entire village of Colient was visible. And even the estate where Alanora lived. Al breathed in the fresh air with delight, raised his hands to the sky. Sheila urged him to go eat quickly, because he couldn't stand it anymore. Emma laughed. Sheila is always like that when it comes to food. Finally, they spread the dishes out on the lawn and sat down to dinner. Emma opened her box and the food looked incredible. Bartolo had really tried. Sheila noticed that there were very few tamagoyaki. Bartolo had warned them that there were not enough ingredients. But Al thought it wasn't critical for lunch. He wanted to supplement the food from the storage space. Sheila tasted the tamagoyaki, her cheeks turning pink. It all melted in her mouth. Emma decided to try her bento too. Sister Ala praised the onigiri. Its nice texture, its softness from the first bite. Emma agreed. Al said the onigiri tasted better warm. The girls thought it was Bartolo's new recipe, and the guy confirmed it. And they go well with fish, too. After a hearty lunch, Al collapsed onto the grass. Delicious food, beautiful views, free time. The real treasure of Colient was right here. Suddenly a bird's silly cry rang out and Al jumped up, startled. He looked up at the sky. Al decided to ask his sister what kind of strange bird it was. She was surprised. Didn't he know? It was a funi, a bird that is sometimes found on the highlands. But the strangeness wasn't just in his voice. He could run on the ground, although he often tripped. Al watched him and thought it was very strange. The hero wondered how long his sister would continue to speak in such a sophisticated tone. She explained that she always behaves like that when she is away from home. The girl defiantly replied that she would ignore these words. Every girl has her own secrets. Al turned white. He understood everything. Emma smiled. It seemed that Mrs. Eleanor loved her little brother very much. Sheila looked at them and agreed. Al decided to clarify. Was his sister really worried about him? Emma apologized for overhearing them. Alanora has always been one of those who even laughs with a serious expression on her face. In this case, the hero didn't understand anything. Everything was strange. The sister looked away and grumbled that she didn't care. She just wanted to make sure he wasn't behind. Al stared at her in silence. One day, he went into a village tavern. There was so much noise and commotion everywhere that old Carla could barely keep up. It turned out to be because of the rich harvest and preparations for the festival, which was in 5 days. Al had forgotten that it was already that time. The harvest was coming to an end. Carla was sure that in 3 days the village would explode with pre-holiday noise. This year, they also planned a dream tournament. She suggested that Alfred would participate, and he confirmed it. The tavern was a place of celebration. Syria noted with a smile that at least it wasn't as noisy here as it was at the estate. Al stretched out on the bed, smiling. It was really loud outside the window. After putting on 2 pairs of pants and warming himself with fire magic, he decided that it would be better to spend the cold day in a warm corner. But then his sister flew into the room. It was time to practice with the sword. Dissatisfied, he muttered into the pillow. I could have knocked. It was freezing outside. Alanora just smiled. If you don't practice, you won't get better. Al reminded them that they had to prepare for the harvest festival. The sister replied that even if something didn't work out, they could always practice more. Noticing his gloomy look, she promised to help him with his face. First, wipe away that anger. Al waved his hand. He knew it was useless anyway. He was shivering from the cold outside. His sister called out, "Why are you standing there? You need to move to get warm." Al just stared at her in silence, horrified. He couldn't believe his eyes. Alanora and Silvio came out in shorts and t-shirts. Aren't they cold? Silvio greeted him cheerfully. It reminded him of school children who wear t-shirts in the cold to look cooler. They say it's not cold, but that's a lie. Little sister is still understandable. But brother Silvio? Although he replied that it gets warm when moving. Eleonora demanded an answer to the previous question. As they were jogging, she asked again. Al looked away, his sister being too pushy. Silvio intervened. It would be better to decide everything by duel. Al flinched. It was a worrying sign. After the run, his father smiled. Now it was time to practice with the sword. Everyone obediently stood up, although Al was barely breathing. It had only been 5 months since he had first picked up a wooden sword. But recently he had begun to hear a pleasant whistling sound when he struck. His father had noticed that the swing lacked power. He had to use his whole body weight. Al remembered how Silvio kept asking his father questions about fencing. He was really serious, and so was his sister. Paying no attention to anyone, Eleonora concentrated on practicing her strokes. Al suspected that wooden swords weren't so dull after all. Eleonora suddenly looked straight at him and caught him off guard. Al didn't understand what she had just done. His gaze stopped on the slowly falling leaf. Suddenly, the leaf fell into 4 equal parts, right before his eyes. His sister cut the leaf into 4 pieces with one blow. He heard only one sound, but Eleanor's look clearly hinted, "Get angry, and the same will happen to you." Her father came over and reminded her that this was just a warm-up, and you can't play with sword techniques. Eleonora apologized and bowed. After that, the sparring began. Silvio smiled at Al and suggested a good fight. The hero was not happy. Today his opponent was his brother Silvio. Remembering his words to Eleonora, Al regretted that he could not take them back. Silvio reminded him with a smile. It's just sparring, so there's no need to frown. But Al still prepared. A deep breath, and a sudden attack. Silvio was truly surprised by the unexpected attack. His brother admitted that if he tried, Al could really impress. His defense turned out to be really good. To compete with someone like Eleonora, such skill was a must. The hero aims for the thigh. There was a miss. Silvio parried the blow, and Al thanked him profusely. Now he could use that technique in the future. The click of wooden swords interrupted their duel. The hero looked at his father and sister in surprise. This sound was unusual. They put magic into their swords. Eleonora had fire, but it was weak. To even wound a goblin, she needed 3 bullets. Mana only grows when you use it up and replenish it. Al tried to tell his sister this every day, though he doubted she would listen. Finally, the father stopped the fight. Enough for today. The children thanked him, but Al never had time to get even with his brother. It was time to heat the bath. It used to be done with a magic tool, but now Al could do it with magic, twice as fast. Although his sister's fire magic and his mother's water magic could be used, Al didn't trust them. He still remembered the time the ice had exploded. Then he caught a cold because he tried to heat the water naked. So one day, in retaliation, he poured ice water into his brother's bath. While Al was working on the bathtub, he ran into Silvio, who was just passing by. Al suggested that his brother go first. Silvio thanked him and went to get his clothes. Both were pleased, each for his own reasons. The hero couldn't help but laugh. The thought of Silvio swimming in the Arctic Ocean was too tempting. He melted the ice, releasing steam to make it seem hot. Silvio wouldn't guess until he was submerged. Revenge for his sister's insult was supposed to be cold, but the hero couldn't stand it and wanted to see his brother's reaction. But instead, he heard a scream, and he jumped. At the door was her sister. She decided the water was already warm when she saw the steam, and went in. The bath turned out to be ice cold. She knew exactly who was to blame. Al froze, opening the door without even thinking. Eleonora stared at him, her hands shaking. He decided, if he could close the door in time, victory would be his. Carefully, quietly. Just don't make any noise. Just a second. But her foot crept through the door. An ominous smile. And the thought, if she could, she would have broken his neck by now. On the verge of death, his entire biography flashed before his eyes. Al felt it himself, without exaggeration. The next day, Al went shopping with his mother and Tri. Tri was thrilled. So many clothes. Reverie's success opened up many contacts. My sister was not interested in dresses, but in weapons. There was little femininity in her. The salesman decided to help Alfred and showed him men's clothing. Al picked up a shirt with a voluminous collar, no embellishments or embroidery. He sighed. He would have liked something simpler. He said he would wear one when he was like his father. But Eleonora shook her head. It's better not to try. Someone touched his shoulder. The salesman brought a fluffy jacket, and his mother brought overalls. Al reminded him, it's up to him. But he also wants to look like Silvio. Mom explained that it wasn't about the size or the price. It was just that some clothes were only allowed to be worn by those who had reached a certain rank. Al didn't understand. Why would they be displayed here then? The merchant explained that he had brought these things at the request of Lady Helena, to teach Alfred about the titles and ranks associated with clothing. The hero was touched by his mother's concern. Mom looked at the clothes and said, "It's nice, but too simple." An irritated Al grumbled that it suited him just fine. His mother handed him the clothes and suggested that he change behind a screen. Al stumbled into the fitting room with a heavy heart. Meanwhile, Eleonora looked at the merchandise with a gloomy expression. She picked up the sword and didn't understand why she needed to turn it into a decoration. A real blade would be better. Mom looked displeased. Only swords again. She reminded her daughter that she should be more feminine. But Eleonora wouldn't even listen to that. Al admitted that, although not as stylish as Silvio's clothes, this suit was light and comfortable. The color was nice too. However, it was not becoming for the boy to twirl in front of the mirror. When Al returned, he announced that he had changed clothes. Eleonora, his mother, and the salesman stared at him. He didn't understand why. Mom admitted that the jacket suited him. It would have looked plain on a normal person, but Al looked dignified. She asked him to turn around and bend his knees. The change of clothes took a long time. 12 sets, and the hero was exhausted. He finally understood what it was like to go shopping with his wife on the weekend. And his mother was already worried about Eleonora. A girl was wandering around in the men's department, and that's a problem. Mom tried to suggest something more feminine, and Eleonora, though unenthusiastically, was persuaded to go into the fitting room. Al was surprised at how delicately Tree intervened, but when it came to Eleonora, it was all in vain. Tree promised to pick out a few things herself. Mom sighed. These things would definitely fit. Eleonora might have been beautiful, but she didn't care about fashion. Al felt sorry for her. Her mother wanted her daughter to be interested in something other than swords. But Al had already figured out the plan. Eleonora would choose something comfortable for training. Mom just sighed. The hero instantly came up with the idea. The more outfits, the fewer morning workouts. Mom offered a deal. Wear this dress and you don't have to try on the rest. Eleonora felt cold. Her sister looked as if she had lost her spirit. Al doubted the dress would fit, but his mother was sure. However, Mom didn't pressure her. If she didn't want to, she could skip the test. But then she would have to miss training. Al thought, if it would reveal his sister's hidden charm, so be it. Half an hour later, Eleonora called her brother and Tree. They cautiously entered. The sister, blushing, came out in her dress, with Sarah's help. Al and Tree froze. She was truly beautiful. But Eleonora barely moved. Mom smiled. That was exactly the effect she had been hoping for. The next dress would be the last. Al was scared. If it went on like this, they would still have time to practice. Al, in desperation, suggested having some fun. The salesman asked if he was okay. It was already 40 minutes into the next dress. It was taking longer than expected. Al was glad they had cut down on the sword time. My sister tried on a dress with a voluminous skirt, changed her hairstyle, and decorated her hair. Al stared at her and asked, "Who is this stranger?" Eleonora grumbled that it was her. Al jumped back in shock. The voice was familiar, but it was definitely a disguised fake. His sister objected indignantly. His mother had warned him not to stomp his feet in such attire. Eleonora asked him to change out of his dress into his workout clothes. She instantly forgot her fatigue and changed into a zip-up dress. It was difficult to move in the dress, and she liked her hair better without it. Sister sighed with relief and put on her usual outfit. She said that everyday clothes were the best. Mom felt a little sorry. Eleonora looked so cute in the dress. Happy, she grabbed Al's hand and suggested a workout. But first, dinner. Al admitted that the elegance she had just displayed was truly impressive. His sister cheerfully pulled him along and told him to run faster. Exhausted, Alden realized that another crazy day was ahead of him. While rummaging through storage boxes, the hero suddenly came across a find that seemed to him like a real treasure. As Alafa walked down the street, one of the locals greeted Mr. Feudal cheerfully. The villagers assumed that the father was patrolling with his son and asked him not to overexert himself. Everyone was preparing for the harvest festival. The peasants happily shared the harvest. It was a sign that order and prosperity reigned in the house. This showed that the family had settled well in the village. Father and Silvio were in complete agreement. The supplies in the pantry grew every day. Bags and food filled everything around. All of this gradually ended up in the Laz house. There was no more room in the pantry, Al looked at the potatoes and realized. Fall. He had tried to start a fire with leaves before, but it was difficult to control the flames. Microwaves did not exist in this world, so the hero decided to create his own, out of stones. Today he wanted to try something new. In the pile of junk he found what he needed, a large, deep vase. It was just the right size. Now all that remained was to carry her to the garden. With the help of magic it was easy, but the vase was dirty, and the clothes on it were new. Looking around he realized that the location was perfect. Teleporting the vase directly into the garden was risky. Someone might notice. The hero reached the base and decided that the next step was to bypass his father's office. He touched the vase and whispered that they were teleporting together. Making sure once again that there was no one around, he activated the spell. The vase disappeared. Al was about to move on his own when he suddenly heard his name behind him. The voice sounded dangerously familiar. Turning around, he shuddered. It was Alanora. His gaze slid upward. The window. Exit. He didn't see his sister nearby and already wondered what he had heard. Maybe it was just his imagination, but then he heard his father's voice, asking Alanora what had happened. She said she had seen Al from the window. Silvio was surprised. He didn't see anyone. His sister was shocked that he didn't even hear footsteps. Al froze at the window, shocked by her fantasy. Alanora sternly asked what he was doing here. The boy lied that he was just going to the stables. He knew that his sister rarely noticed his lies, but he still decided to avoid making obvious excuses. His sister offered to help him with the paperwork if he had so much free time. It seemed like she really didn't suspect anything. The boy wondered if his mother and father had really forced him to do this. He replied that it would be better if he did arithmetic. His sister pouted, but agreed. Silvio said it would be better to leave those documents to his sister. Al joked that a needle would be more suitable for her, but then there would be no time for training. Alanora changed her mind instantly. Let Silvio work on the numbers while she got to training. Al was impressed by her dedication to the sword. He thought that those who worked so sincerely were incredible. Silvio certainly had a bright future. The vase has been washed. It's time to add coals, put on the metal frame, and prepare the potatoes for baking. When everything was ready, the hero looked with satisfaction at his new ceramic stove. Al inserted a metal basket for the sweet potatoes and placed coals underneath. And voila, the stove was ready. With a wave of his hand, he lit the coals using fire magic. Then he found a lid, a wooden board from a teleporter, covered the vase, sat down next to it, and closed his eyes with pleasure, dreaming of rosy, sweet potatoes. The charcoal emitted infrared rays that evenly roasted the potatoes. The diatomaceous earth in the vase only enhanced the aroma and richness of the taste. There were 30 to 40 minutes left until readiness. The hero decided not to waste time. It was time to practice magic. First he activated fire magic, then switched to water magic. Although it seemed simple, it was a great practice in controlling magic, and a lot of fun. His thoughts slowly returned to his sister's words. The more training, the better the results. She had said this about fencing, but fencing and magic are completely different. You can't light a fire with a sword. You can't drink water in battle. But then the church bell rang. The hero looked at his watch. 40 minutes had already passed. How quickly time flies. He pulled out one potato with magic. It was hot in his hands, so it was time to taste it. But as soon as I touched it, I got burned and screamed. It was very hot. Soft, tender, juicy. The potatoes exceeded all expectations. Time to taste them. The sweetness was natural, without excess sugar. The flesh was tender and didn't fall apart, and the skin wasn't burnt. It was the best he had ever eaten, and there was no shame in eating the skin either. But he had just laid down when he heard his sister's voice. Alanora came with her father and Silvio. They decided to find out what Al was doing. The hero froze, meaning they had already finished their business. Silvio noticed that the vase was warm and asked why he had brought it. The father screamed in horror when he saw that it was the same vase, a gift from Viscount Julian. The children were no less frightened. Al didn't understand why such a thing was in the shed. He just used it for baked potatoes. And that's when the vase started to look expensive. The hero was horrified. It was a gift from a nobleman. He only hoped that they would not be punished. While he was scolding himself, Silvio and his sister looked into the vase. The aroma was coming from there. The sister inhaled the smell with delight, and the brother laughed. The father said that the vase wasn't very valuable, so there was nothing to be angry about. But he would explain everything to his son later. Approaching the children, the father asked for potatoes. Al grabbed his head, thinking that his father was angry. In the end, he only received a short lecture. His father only forbade him from taking anything from the barn without permission. Al nodded, hoping that everything would pass. On the eve of the harvest festival, the feudal lord's kitchen turned into chaos. Bartolo was nervous. Have the vegetables been prepared yet? Yes. Chop them finely. From the sidelines, Al watched as everyone ran around busily, a veritable whirlwind. Today was the beginning of the harvest festival. Everyone in Koliat was looking forward to it, and there was also a big tournament ahead. This is the only day when the entire village could truly rest and relax. At the festival, everyone ate, drank, danced, and had fun without stopping. The fun lasted for 3 days without any worries. If the harvest was meager, the celebration was modest. Everyone hoped that the land would be bountiful next year, and they prayed for it. This year, the celebration was even more colorful, thanks to the profits Al made from his reversi. The harvest festival turned into a lavish anniversary party. Al noticed how Bartolo was lost in his work. He sighed. No matter how much he cooked, it still wasn't enough. All of this reminded the boy of his guilt. The same incident with the reward vase, where he was cooking baked potatoes. Walking along the path near the field, the hero turned around. Something caught his eye. Once upon a time, wheat grew here, but now it is empty. In his past life, he hadn't noticed the changing seasons. He was always in a hurry. Now he could finally stop. After admiring the view, Al returned to the village and warmly greeted the locals. The village was unrecognizable. So many people, so many colors, so many holiday decorations. The boy noticed many new faces. Travelers, shopkeepers, traders. Even with the new building, there wasn't much room. Pushing through the crowd, Al spotted Roland and waved to him. The hero wondered how many more people would come. Roland estimated about 20 more. Al felt uncomfortable among the adult crowd. Al doubted anyone else would squeeze in. Roland smiled. If anything, let them play outside. It would be difficult to hold a match. No space, no visibility. Al walked up to the counter and met Syria, who greeted Mr. Alfred. The guy asked permission to put chairs and tables outside. The woman agreed and added, "Let's get those dirty things cleaned up." Al immediately threw himself on the chair, promising to do everything, and Roland wanted to deal with the dirty guy. But Syria threw a murderous look in his direction. Roland immediately knew it was best to run away. Meanwhile, Al magically arranged the chairs and tables. When everything was ready, everyone looked at the chairs in surprise. It was incredible how skillfully the guy had done it. Roland admitted that magic was cool. One of the boys noticed that it was earth magic, but he couldn't even come close to doing it himself. Roland admitted that his fire magic could only light a tree, and that 3 times a day. His friend said, "You're no match for Alfred." Roland poked at Wester, saying he had water. What could he do? Wester replied, "Get a bucket of water." But Roland laughed it off. Roland teased, "What would you do if there was a fire?" And Wester, "What would you do? Set yourself on fire." Al understood. It was about to lead to a fight. The crowd was getting excited. Some were even placing bets. Al begged them to stop because the girls were starting to get scared. The audience was already fantasizing. Which of the guys was the dominant and which was the submissive? They seemed to be having the most fun of all. The friend didn't get the hint because Vester had just won. But the blonde smiled mysteriously. She liked both options. At that moment, an irritated Syria came out of the establishment and ordered everyone to shut up. "If you want to fight, go to the tournament." She reminded him. "Everyone is here for the tournament." Al nodded fearfully. Typical maternal severity. Roland and Vester immediately fell silent. Roland smiled cheekily and suggested that everything be decided in a game of reversi. Wester agreed, but he should have said it first. The boys scattered in different directions, snorting menacingly. And the girls laughed. Cute fools. But later Roland and Wester were eliminated in the first round. But Al moved on effortlessly. How could he? He's the inventor of reversi. It would have been a shame to lose at the start. At one of the stalls, Al saw that lunch was already being served. The tournament was about to resume, and he hoped that Carla would go on to get her revenge. One of the spectators suggested a move, but the other argued there was a better option. The argument escalated to accusations of incompetence, and Al noted that the spectators had already become strategists themselves. Roland told Wester that he had also been eliminated in the first round. Wester grumbled that he had just been unlucky with his opponent. If he had been someone else, he would have won. From the outside, it seemed that the two were getting along very well. Wester assumed that his opponent was a foreigner, but they didn't know for sure. The guy just turned out to be very strong. Vester asked who knocked out Roland. He replied, "The one who ate the tamagoyaki." Wester had hoped that his opponent was at least a little strong. But Roland didn't sense his strength, and that only proved to Wester that Roland was too weak. Al tried to ignore them. Looking at the guy, Al realized he didn't remember his face, and that was alarming. For some reason, the boy felt uneasy in the presence of these strangers. He should have been more careful. Suddenly, Herman appeared and announced to Alfred that his opponent in the second round would be the same tamagoyaki lover. Herman said that as soon as both were ready, we could start. But for now, the man held out his empty plate and asked for more. Carla warned him that if he ate it all, there wouldn't be any left for the others. The girl was amazed. How much more did he plan to eat? He responded with a gesture. He threw a bag of gold coins. Al's eyes widened. It was rare for anyone in the village to carry gold. He must be an adventurer like Rumba. Strong and a little suspicious. The man stood up and turned to the organizer. "Did you hear that his next opponent is a small one?" I looked at the guy and immediately realized, yes, this is him. Herman confirmed, "We can begin." The man introduced himself as Melmar and offered a game. Al politely gave his name in response. In the midst of Harvest Day celebrations in the village of Colette, the second round of the Reversi tournament began. The feudal lord's second son, Alfred Light, competes in this duel. His opponent is a mysterious man named Melmar. The result is an undisputed victory for Alfred. The guy advances to the third round and his opponent surrenders. During the game, Al realized that Melmar wasn't as strong as he thought. The true power of the creator of Reversi felt completely different. After the game, the man asked for tamagoyaki again, but Carla refused. She offered spaghetti. Alfred laughed. An unexpectedly stubborn foodie. Most adults would be irritated after losing to a child. But Melmar was calm. Al decided he had to earn his trust. The hero thought that he and Rumba could make a good duo. One of the spectators came up and praised Alov's tactics. They were impressive. The guy smiled and asked her name. The stranger apologized for the delay and introduced himself as Yulina. He said he hoped to meet her in the game. Yulina politely asked Carla for fruit water. Al thought about their names. He thought he had heard them somewhere before, or maybe he just thought he had. After that, Al won one game after another and reached the final of the tournament. In the finals, he had to face Carla's winner, a man named Yulina with squinted eyes. He skillfully outplayed his rivals. Of course, he was far from his brother Silvio, but Yulina was a serious rival. Al felt the pressure. His pride was at stake, but now all attention had to be focused on the finale. When Al and his opponent approached the table, the audience greeted them with applause. Carla wished him luck. Roland wondered who would win, and Wester had no doubt, Mr. Alfred, without a doubt. After all, he had easily defeated Carla last time. Roland tried to calm him down, but the girl heard him and threw an angry look at Vester, noting that he had created Reversi himself. But Yulina easily got past her, too. Vester insisted that the match would be decent. Carla asked him to stop reminding her of her defeat, but Vester couldn't help himself. The winner and the loser were the only measure. Roland agreed. Al thought that if they were in Carla's shoes, they would be even angrier. She asked who they were betting on. Roland bet 5 coins on Alfred. The villagers also placed bets, some on Alfred, some on Yulina. Al smiled. It's fun until defeat becomes painful. Before the start, Yulina wished him a good game, and Al reciprocated. Herman solemnly opened the final of the Reversi tournament and gave the signal for the start. He asked to play black, and the hero agreed. Then he would take white. Yulina didn't seem like someone who sets primitive traps. Al decided to act unexpectedly and carefully calculated how many chips he could take. This was going to be a real battle of wits. At least that's what he thought. Finally, the game began. Although everyone was expecting something special, everything went quite smoothly. But still, it was just a game of Reversi. Roland wondered why Al had put the chip there. He could have taken another one. Vester thought it was stupid, and Carla reminded him that it wasn't always a good idea to grab chips right away. Both players were determined to go all the way. At first glance, Yulina was leading in chips. But the score in the middle of the game doesn't decide anything. The main thing is who will have the advantage at the end. Al's entire strategy resembled a full-scale offensive. Then he saw something interesting. He noticed that the hero had limited Yulina's move spaces. She could only move diagonally, acting within the limits of Al's plan. Al forced Yulina to take only positions from which it was impossible to expand the attack. Instead, he himself took over the sides of the field, which were difficult to regain in the middle of the game. Yulina understood. The key points were already in the hands of the opponent. Roland did not understand anything. Wester only smiled. Rommel offered to explain, but Wester blamed it on Carla, although he himself did not understand anything. Carla explained. Mr. Alfred had lured Yulina into a trap. Wherever he went, Al would take the corners or sides. Roland and Wester didn't seem to understand. Maybe they didn't know how to play reversi at all. Carla chided Wester for not understanding anything until she explained it to him. In her opinion, they trusted their instincts more. That's why they lost. However, despite the contrasts, this trio made quite a bright company. Yulina felt that this game was a real torment for him. Finally, he admitted, he saw no path to victory. Al smiled and finished the match with a score of 51-13. Herman put his hand on his shoulder. It was a clear victory. Mr. Alfred became the tournament champion. Yulina shook his hand gratefully. He really thought he had a chance, and Al understood. Yulina was distinguished by his deep thinking, although he was inferior in experience. After all, he really didn't have enough experience. Al promised himself that one day he would organize a game between himself and Silvio. Someone in the audience ordered drinks, sugar-free tamagoyaki, and some meat. Syria understood everything without words. Melnar called the champion and showed him a bag of coins. A treat. Al smiled and readily agreed. Suddenly, Yulina approached the company and asked if he could join. Melnar readily agreed and invited him to sit down. Al suspected that the two were already acquaintances. Melnar called out to Syria and ordered 3 mugs of ale. The girl asked in surprise, 3? Yulina was instantly indignant. You can't order ale for a child. No one knew that Al was already an adult. In that case, Melnar ordered a fruit water, while Al decided to have spaghetti. Yulina also wanted the same. After all, this is where they invented it. Carla smiled and remembered that the author of the recipe was Mr. Alfred. Yulina looked at him in surprise, and Al just smiled. They raised their glasses, celebrating Mr. Alfred's victory. Al downed a glass of juice at a time. Melnar laughed. The guy looked like he was drinking real ale. Of course, it was just fruit water. Melnar offered the boy a taste of real ale, but Yulina stopped him. After all, Alfred is still a child, Melnar agreed. They asked him how old he was, and Al replied, 6. Yulina was surprised at how reserved he was for his age. Al explained that it was a strict upbringing. Yulina suggested that everyone get some rest and treated everyone to fruit water. Alio liked how they treated him. Later, the boy addressed the audience. My name is Alfred, I'm 6. Now I'm going to show you a trick. Everyone waited, intrigued. Al created the earth from the box with magic and declared he would climb out of it in 10 seconds without breaking it. People began to doubt whether this was even possible. Al asked them to count from 10 to 1. The box closed. The audience began to count down hesitantly. Al mentally promised to exceed their expectations. It was time to show the real magic. Suddenly, a blinding light flashed, and everyone covered their eyes. The box fell apart, but Al was nowhere to be seen. Everyone was worried. Where had he gone? The light was still blinding. When they turned around, they saw Al standing behind them. Everyone was amazed and asked how he had managed to get out. Al remained silent, and the audience applauded enthusiastically. The guy literally disappeared and reappeared. While some thought he teleported to the kitchen, in reality, he simply destroyed the box and walked out the door. Al thanked everyone and hoped they had enjoyed it. People were shouting enthusiastically. The performance was great, and they begged for another performance. But Al knew that if he revealed the secret after the first trick, the effect would not be as impressive. He could have called the trick King Alfred's Incredible Escape. Syria treated everyone to fruit water. When Al thanked her, she said, "If you want to thank me, tell me a secret." Yulina admitted that he didn't understand anything either. Al laughed. "If you reveal the secret, it's no longer a show." Syria agreed, and the guy thanked him again for the drink. Al thought the drink was a bit warm and used ice magic to cool it down. At that moment, Yulina and Elnar looked at his glass in surprise. Yulina was surprised that Al had used magic again. He had no idea that he possessed the ice element. Elnar remembered the ice princess in the royal capital where this magic was used. Al looked at him in surprise. This was the first time he had heard of the ice princess. The men were amazed. The boy possessed the same magic as the princess from the royal capital. Al looked at them in confusion, not understanding who they were talking about. Elnar explained. The people call that girl the ice princess, but in reality she is the 3rd princess of the kingdom of Misfeld. Ordinary people had no choice but to come up with such a fancy nickname for her. Al was curious. What else is she called? The men replied that others called her High Crown Princess. Calling her a doll was a bit of an exaggeration, but Al still didn't understand why she was called that. The third princess of Misfeld, Layla, was unable to walk since birth. Because of this, many around her treated her with indifference or even cruelty. But when she mastered ice magic on her own, people's attitudes changed dramatically. They began to welcome her with open arms. However, due to the hypocrisy of those around her, Layla lost faith in both people and her family. Sometimes it's too painful to see a person's true face. Al sincerely sympathized with the girl. Al clarified that these were all just rumors, even though they seemed too plausible. He wanted to make sure that they were just ordinary people's gossip. Yulina smiled and admitted that he himself was an unusual person. Then he took off his mask and told the boy not to pick on him. There was no time for childish games. Al guessed what the blacksmith would say. The guy was even more surprised when Elnar said, "He is also unusual." Al turned pale. Two special adults were sitting in front of him at once. What are they doing here? Why did they choose this remote village? Yulina jokingly asked not to treat them too formally. In reality, Elnar was a count, and Yulina a viscount, both close friends of Lord Nord. Al nearly fell over in shock when he realized who was standing before him. They had come to personally check on the situation in the village. The Lord had to warn them that there might be guests. Earlier, Bartolo had mentioned that this year notables might visit. Yulina heard from the villagers that Al was Nord's second son. Al confirmed, yes, he was Alfred's son. Elnar said that the boy was quite like his parents, but he liked his silly side better. Al just smiled awkwardly. Yulina stood up and said that it was time for them to go. He left the gold on the table. Al asked in confusion, "Where are you going?" Yulina replied that they were going to the estate. His wife was supposed to arrive by now. It was no use keeping her waiting. Al was shocked to learn that Yulina was also married. Approaching the carriage, Al noticed a coat of arms with an eagle. Yulina explained that it was the family coat of arms that his grandfather had received from the king. Al said it looked cool. Then he looked at another, larger carriage, and assumed it belonged to Melnar. It had crossed swords on it. Melnar replied that their coats of arms were no match for the Lowlight families. But Yulina winked. The Lowlights had a coat of arms with a dragon. Al remembered, indeed, there was a large dragon on their carriage. Although his father was ashamed of the nickname Dragon Slayer, the fact could no longer be hidden. Al thought, well, who is ashamed of such a nickname? He could barely hold back his laughter at the mere nickname. Melnar noticed this, and Yulina smiled, although he realized that it was already too much. Al decided that if he were in his place, he would find it unbearable to hear such a nickname. The idea of a dragon slayer amused him even more. The boy almost burst out laughing. Melnar pulled his cheeks to calm him down a little. Suddenly, Al's father himself appeared behind him and asked about the dragon slayer. All three turned at the same time. Lord Lowlight stood before them. Melnar bowed, introducing himself as one of the nobles of Misfeld, and thanked him for the invitation. Yulina also bowed and gave her name, Yulina Estelle. Despite their peasant attire, they exuded an aura of nobility. Their confidence and manner of acting left no doubt that they were true aristocrats standing before Al. Al opened the door to the Lowlight's home, asking permission to greet the guests on behalf of the family's second son. Melnar thanked him, and noted that the young man was very polite. Al smiled, but was about to disappear when his father stopped him. The father said that even after such a show, his son would not run away without talking. But right now he needed to talk to the Count and the Viscount, so he would talk to his son later. He smiled at Al and asked him to wait for him in the garden, and not to forget the wooden sword. Yulina, seeing how alarmed Al was, could barely hold back her laughter. 3 men approached the door and knocked to enter the room. The girl sitting next to Al's mother suddenly jumped up from her chair when she saw Yulina. Lenaria threw herself into the arms of the man she couldn't wait to see. Al was surprised by her appearance. She was so small that there was nothing more to say. The way Yulina was twirling it in the air was completely out of keeping with his reserved, intelligent appearance that morning. Al had no doubts left. It was definitely not Viscount Estelle, but Viscount Lawland. Al's father pretended not to notice, only coughing. The man reminded Lenaria that she had not yet introduced herself. She lifted her magnificent dress, bowed politely, and said that her name was Lenaria, and that she was the wife of a viscount. She was delighted to meet Count Melnar and Alfred. As she approached Al, She heard him introduce himself as the second son of the Lowlight family and welcome her happily to their home. She folded her hands and thanked him for his hospitality, hoping to make friends with Alfred. Al blushed and thought that Yulina must have fallen in love with her smile. Later, Lunaria thanked her again for the warm welcome and praised Bartolo's cuisine. Al's father asked if they had tried the local spaghetti. Yulina replied that Melnar really liked it. Melnar remarked that it sounded as if he himself had not. Suddenly, Al felt someone's gaze from behind him. He turned around and saw Lunaria following him. She smiled and said that she was tired of being called Mrs. Zrania, so she could just call herself Lunaria. He hesitantly addressed her by name and asked why she was following him. She replied that she just wanted to talk for a while. She made innocent eyes and asked if he minded. Al couldn't refuse, even though he warned her that his room was tiny and there was nothing interesting there. But Lunaria agreed and looked like she was looking forward to it. But the closer she got, the more anxiety gripped the boy. He looked back sharply, and Lunaria became concerned that something had happened. Al was sure something was coming towards his head, but he waved it away, probably thinking it was a dream. He realized that he had become too sensitive after the incident with Lunaria's sister, who kept sneaking up on him from behind. It became restless again. Only the two of them remained in the room, so the reason for his anxiety was precisely in her. To check, Al changed his pace. Lunaria was now walking much further behind, which was a bit reassuring, but he cursed in his mind. It was all starting to annoy him. Finally, they reached the room, but as soon as he turned around, Lunaria suddenly patted him on the head. They both froze in surprise. The girl smiled confusedly, saying she had just stroked him. But when she saw his reaction, she stopped. She blushed, embarrassed, and apologized. She thought he liked it. Al couldn't say he didn't like it, but the gesture puzzled him a little. Lunaria was glad the boy knew the word puzzle and started calling him smart. Embarrassed, she explained that she just thought he was cute and really wanted to pet him. Al finally understood why he had felt this strange intention all along. It turned out that Lunaria really loves children. She's the youngest of her sisters and has always dreamed of having a little brother. Al understood her feelings. In his past life in Japan, he had 3 sisters, too many. As the youngest, he didn't understand what they wanted from him and often became their living toy. And even now the situation hasn't changed. If he had a younger brother, he could have used him to protect himself from these sisters, at least from Lunaria. With that thought, Al sighed heavily. Al told Lunaria that he wouldn't mind having a younger brother himself, but she beamed, saying that then he wouldn't mind becoming her child. The boy paused, trying to comprehend what she had just said. With enthusiasm, she again suggested that he be her child. Again, Al tried to make sense of her strange proposal. It was too abrupt. He had only mentioned his younger brother, and she was already talking about children. It would have been better if she and the Viscount had a child of their own. Lunaria felt embarrassed and turned away because it was a bit awkward to talk about children with Estelle. But Al didn't understand why. They seemed to be married. Suddenly the hallway became cool, and Al decided to go into the room. Lunaria agreed. When he went inside, he wanted to warm up the room a little. The girl looked around and apologized. She didn't see the fireplace. She admitted that she only had wind magic and asked if there were any tricks to using it. Al suggested using magic at the right moments. For example, knocking a branch off a tree or refreshing the air in a room. Al thought household magic was a wonderful practice. Lunaria was confused. She meant something else entirely. The boy looked at her in surprise. It was about combat magic, similar to wine cut. Al had not yet practiced mid-level magic, but he understood it. The problem is that such magic is dangerous, and Al rarely left the village. But even ordinary household magic can become combat magic if used correctly. Lunaria was delighted with his idea, and Al was embarrassed to hear her call him by name. In this world, rarely did anyone use magic in their daily lives. But if they did, life would be much easier, and such magic could protect against threats. In his case, the threat was his older sister, so he had to be able to defend himself. Lunaria walked over to the table where the reversi game was. But after the tournament, Al couldn't look at it anymore. Lunaria happily reported that this game had even reached the capital. Al was surprised. It seemed that the merchant he had allowed to sell the game had quickly sold out. And for some reason, that made him a little angry. The girl said her father had managed to buy one at the height of its popularity. She was thrilled when he asked to play with her. And then Al found out that her father was Duke Lao. Lunaria blushed because she hadn't had time to tell him about it yet. Al heard it for the first time. Duke is the highest title among the nobility, awarded only for great merit. Suddenly, her sister's voice was heard from behind. Alina indignantly asked why Al didn't listen to his father's words. Al ignored her remark and said that he should have knocked first. Alina assured him that she had done so, especially since they had guests. Lunaria was also surprised by her appearance, but even if she knocked, it was rude to come in without permission. Besides, Lunaria didn't notice her coming. Al looked at the confused Lunaria and assumed she was somehow related to the royal family. But she denied it, and he sighed with relief. Because if he said something inappropriate to the monarch's relative, it could end sadly for the village nobleman. So Al decided to ask something else. He wondered how she had become the Viscount's wife. Alina was also interested. Lunaria blushed and didn't know how best to answer. Finally, holding her hot cheeks, she confessed, "It was love at first sight." Alina smiled enthusiastically and assumed that it was then that they met the Viscount. Love gossip, it seems, is the same everywhere. Lunaria replied that it was 7 years ago. Al clutched his head. It turned out that Ulina the Viscount was to blame for everything. Al was shocked to learn that Lunaria was only 16 this year. She looked even younger. Looking at the situation from a different angle, he realized her love had begun when she was 9. Falling in love at first sight at that age sounded a bit strange. Alina apologized and asked how they managed to get married. Al pointed a finger up. "Good question, sister." At first, Lunaria's father was against it, but eventually he gave his consent. Alina clarified. "So she had been striving for this for 7 years?" Al looked at the girl with admiration. There was not a shadow of selfishness in her. He wanted to sincerely pay tribute to her. Alina beamed. This is a real fairy tale. Love between people from different worlds. Lunaria, although embarrassed, happily continued to tell the story. Al shook his head. His sister would never achieve that. She lacked feminine charm. But Alina confidently declared that she was fine with femininity. But Al knew she didn't understand him. He believed that true feminine strength is the ability to emphasize one's personality, to shine from within. And the sister probably thought it was about fists or swords, which was confirmed. She hit him on the head. Al shouted and asked why. Alina replied with a smile. A voice in her head told her to do it. Al sighed. She had some kind of stupid oracle. Lunaria laughed, saying they had a great relationship. But Al didn't believe it really looked that way on the outside. Ulina entered the room and reminded Lunaria that it was time for them to go. She shouted to Estelle, and Al became alert. The girl just smiled. Everything was fine. Ulina looked at him in disbelief, but the girl gently pushed him towards the exit. After leaving, she asked Al if she and her sister really had such a wonderful relationship. The boy was already lying in bed, not wanting to get up. It was cold, but the blanket was his favorite winter treasure. Even though he had magic, no power could match the charm of a warm futon. He exclaimed that he would never leave it. With his eyes closed, Al felt as if he were floating in a warm sky. Absolute bliss. If you fell asleep on your side, you could enjoy both the pillow and the blanket at the same time. Suddenly, I felt like going to the toilet. But how could I get out of this cozy paradise? The cold would instantly break through all the cracks. He hesitated, to give up and leave or to endure, defending the warmth to the last. This is one of the most difficult battles that all heroes go through. Al clutched the blanket tightly. It was already dawn outside, and the blinding light was burning his eyes. He opened his eyes, and the path to the toilet seemed almost impossible. He tried to pull his leg out, but the cold made it instantly retract. But he managed, it wasn't too late, to put his leg back into the futon and embrace the warmth. But the desire grew, the limit approached. His pride was on the verge of exploding. Finally he stood up. He hugged himself, shivering from the cold. He wanted to teleport to the bathroom, but decided to keep the futon warm. Wrapping himself in a sweater, he darted to the restroom. Then suddenly, I woke up with a scream. It was a dream. Birds were chirping outside the window. The dream seemed incredibly realistic. And outside it was the second day of the harvest festival. The cold explained everything. But that's what suddenly made him wake up. He jumped up, looked under the blanket. He couldn't believe it. But no, the bed was dry. He breathed a sigh of relief. His dignity was saved. Reassured, he lay back down in his warm bed and decided to sleep a little longer. But at that moment, there was a knock on the door. Silvio asked if Al was awake yet. Hearing his name, Al initially replied that he was still asleep. Silvio smiled. He hadn't even had time to say a word. Al wanted to say something about Olean, but abruptly shouted that he didn't want to hear anything and asked him to leave him. Silvio was confused, but had to obey. Alina knocked and assumed he was already awake. She had heard the conversation with Silvio. Al regretted having told his brother too much. Alina immediately wanted to go in, and the boy thought she was in too much of a hurry. The sister entered the room, approached the bed, and waved. It was time to wake up. Al gave the sweetest smile, closed his eyes, and pretended to be asleep. Wherever Alina looked, she would only see her sweet, sleepy little brother. That's what he thought. Alina put her hand on his face. Al screamed in pain. He wanted to ask her to remove her hand from his skull, but her sister was in no hurry. After all, today was only the second day of the festival. Do we really have to get up so early? Al said that Count Melnar and Viscount Loli also wanted to relax. Alina corrected Viscount Ulina and warned that he was treading on thin ice. Al began to wonder what was worse, walking on thin ice or on Alina's line, which is called breasts. His sister tugged at his hair as if reading his mind. He exclaimed, "Why didn't you say anything?" Alina explained with a smile. Female intuition told her to hit, and that oracular intuition. His sister reminded him that morning training was in progress. Al stretched and said that his father hadn't said anything. It turned out that his father had just decided to do it, training with Count Melnar and Rumba. Al wasn't thrilled that Rumba had returned. Why today? He wanted to leave the game, to say goodnight. But Alina said the Count and Rumba had summoned him personally. Until the last moment he hoped to hide behind his brother Silvio. He heard a voice and looked at the door. Alina said, "If it was Silvio, he would break. His defense is weak." Al admitted, Silvio as a shield is not an option. Since everything was clear, Alina hoped he would come with them. Al slowly got out of bed. If the Count himself had summoned him, there was nowhere to go. Holding his forehead, he prayed that no trace of his sister's grip would remain. Later, Alina came back to check if he had gathered himself. There she saw Silvio sitting facing the wall. She asked him what he had forgotten. It was time for training, but before that she decided Al should eat breakfast. Without a proper breakfast, there will be no full-fledged training. The problem is that the guy is not very hungry in the morning. But for a calm and cheerful life, you need to keep your body in shape. Al went into the kitchen and greeted his mother. Alina nodded happily. "Good morning," Alina chuckled. "The kids are a bit too active today." Al didn't understand why she said that. He looked at his mother and asked, "What does he have on his forehead?" Alina was surprised. What is he talking about? Al suspected that instead of a forehead he had a pumpkin, and something was marked there. The mother laughed and said that everything was fine with him. His forehead was not deformed. But why was she laughing then? Al was indignant. She was doing it again. At that moment, Sarah, the maid, came into the kitchen, bringing breakfast. Al thought he could rely on her. She had the same observation as his mother, not his. He thanked her. Sarah smiled. But when she looked at him, she giggled. Al noticed this and said it out loud. The girl immediately covered her mouth with her hand. While he was eating breakfast, he decided to ask his mother if Sarah's sneezing had anything to do with it. If he didn't find out anything, he would ask Sarah herself. But his mother had already disappeared as if by magic. Al decided to just finish the delicious meal. It would definitely lift his spirits. He stuffed his mouth with fresh vegetables that seemed to penetrate to the bones, and he almost dropped his fork when he heard laughter from the next room. The unfamiliar girl couldn't help but ask aloud what was on his forehead. Al slammed the table and demanded an explanation from his mother, who was also barely able to hold back her laughter. She agreed. She had to hold back. Alina said that the mark on her forehead looked very funny. She was afraid that Al would be offended. Al was sure that it was her handiwork. And he ran to his room. He couldn't believe how his sister had such demonic grip strength. She was clearly not human. She was the demon queen. Al thought that instead of laughing, everyone could just tell him the truth. He decided to take his training seriously and swore to be faithful to his sister until death. But before that, he had to finish his breakfast. With a knife and fork in his hands, he heroically asked the Demon King to wait a moment. He began to devour his food with lightning speed. Alina and the maid came over to apologize. They shouldn't have laughed at him. Al proudly stood up from the table, thanked for the food, and said goodbye. Alina reminded him of the training, barely holding back her laughter. Mina, however, managed to pull herself together. She shouted that it was Alfred's. The palm print had almost disappeared. Al, as he left, declared that he was not angry at all. Sarah, having heard everything, hid behind the door. On the training ground, Alina greeted him with the phrase, "He was late. He must have been eating all the time." Al angrily replied that he had come to cut her into pieces. The sister looked at him with a murderous cold gaze, and didn't understand what he had just said. Al bowed, and Alina continued her warm-up as if nothing had happened. Silvio came over and apologized for being late. Al was angry with himself, because he was scared of her gaze again. He felt like an animal being trained, and even if he had been disciplined, he wouldn't have had the strength to defend himself now. Once, the girls would make Yevon run for some snack. Alina asked her brother not to talk nonsense in the morning. He should stretch. Al nodded sadly. He didn't want to fight Rumba today. He didn't look like a man who knew how to control himself. One swing, and Al would be blown into the air. Melnar offered to take his place, but Al knew he was a fighter to the bone, just like his father. One look was enough. Melnar said he was training his child, so there was no need to worry. Al was surprised that the guy had a child, and suggested a duel later. He should be more careful with children, but Rumba did not agree. He also wanted to fight Red. The Count reminded him of how Rumba had broken a wooden sword, and the Count replied that the Count had once done the same thing. Al was shocked. Melnar really had doubts. The argument between the Count and the adventurer escalated until Alina asked them to disperse. Al looked at Silvio wearily. He was really busy today. Always serious, but today, with a cold glint in his eyes. All because of an enemy that had to be defeated. And that enemy was Sister Alina. Silvio had the same problem. Al thought that together with his brother, with their fighting spirit, they could fight her off. He clenched his fist and whispered to the Demon King, "Wait. Today everything will change." At this point, their father gathered everyone together. It was time to start sparring. Al grabbed his face. "No, that's impossible. You have to act against the Demon King with a whole group, like a hero with a mage or cleric." Alina gave him an icy look and said she liked everything. Silvio looked at his younger brother, and he had the same sinister smile. Al flinched nervously. Why was his brother smiling like Alina? The first fight was Silvio versus Al. Al thought his sister was planning to wear them both out before fighting her. He barely managed to keep from saying it out loud. Melnar remembered how Al had cooled the juice with ice magic yesterday, a rare ability, and he had also created a shelter with earth. Rumba agreed and told how Al had created a giant icicle. Silvio swung his sword without further ado. Fortunately, Al had time to react. At the last moment, he stopped his brother's blow. The force was unexpectedly great. Al noticed that Silvio's fighting style had changed. He was now facing a different opponent. If it came down to punch counting, Al would be only a few steps behind. He smiled at his brother, noting that he was being too aggressive today. Silvio gritted his teeth, remembering what Al had said about his weak defense. Al could barely contain his furious onslaught and didn't understand why his brother looked so disappointed. Silvio was approaching. His sword almost grazed Al's face, but he dodged at the last moment. Al hoped Silvio would appreciate it, because thanks to his sister's care, he had achieved mastery of evasion. Alina assumed that there was a personal conflict between the brothers, but Rumba smiled slyly. Nothing of the sort. Al furtively glanced in their direction, but an angry Silvio waved his sword and ordered them not to be distracted. Al realized that the previous blow was a trap and barely dodged the next blow from below. They both froze, assessing each other. The fight proved to be more difficult than the previous ones. Al looked more tired, and Silvio wanted to seize the moment, but his father stopped the duel. Silvio was indignant. Not a single blow went through. But his father explained that this time the important thing was not victory, but the demonstration of strength. Al sighed with relief and fell to the ground, admitting that he had reached his limit. Silvio smiled, saying that he would definitely hit next time. Al thought his father had noticed how aggressive his brother was today, but his father just smiled. He was the older brother. Most likely, he simply did not want to give in to the younger one. The hero decided, as with Shigami, he would get ahead of him at the decisive moment. Silvio was a workaholic, so that's realistic. But Al still relied more on magic than on the sword. That's why his father warned, no magic during battles. Al asked to be allowed at least a little bit, but his father refused and reminded him that he had to understand the essence of the training. Al was forced to agree. Father announced the next fight, Alina against Al. Al could not believe his ears and froze in horror. He didn't understand why he had to fight again, and not his brother. Alina just smiled. Her father added, "He looks like he's full of strength." Since everyone was already fighting, Al was the only one left. He grabbed his head and screamed. Seeing his reaction, Alina just burst into a smile and ran to her brother. Time to start. Al anxiously searched for Silvio with his eyes. I wanted to say something to my brother, but he just smiled. You should give it your all. Al looked at his sister and felt a growing terror. He wanted to ask for a little leniency. This was a battle between a hero and the Demon King himself. A real duel, the hero Alfred against the Demon King. The father gave the command to begin, but the duel had barely begun and ended in an instant finisher. Father stopped them with a raised hand. Al lay beaten, admitting that it was cruel. And his father himself said that the beating was not necessary. Alina said he was just too weak. Al made excuses. He had spent everything in the previous fight. But her sister doubted that it would have made any difference. Count Melnar approached his father and asked to speak. Al wiped the dirt from his face, but before he could recover, his father called him again. Meanwhile, Alina, satisfied, took a sip from her glass. After a long workout, she didn't even break a sweat. Silvio smiled. His sister doesn't know how to hide her facial expressions. As he gripped his sword tighter, the hero finally realized his weakness. The Count was pleased to note that the boy had finally realized it. Typical of a fighting fan, the Count also trained his own child. Now it was time to put his skills into practice, and he called on Rumba. Rumba swung and impatiently called for battle. Al pressed his sword to him and begged him to stop. Contrary to expectations, he managed to block the blow. Although he was shaking badly, the sound of the swords frightened him to the point of panic. Rumba only smiled. The stand was broken. Al opened his eyes and saw it coming at him again. He screamed in fear that Rumba would kill him. But over time, he began to get used to the rhythm of battle. Melnar didn't believe that Al, with such skills, could become the best, but he saw in him the spirit of an adventurer. The next morning, the last day of the festival, heavy sighs could be heard from Al's room. Al had spent most of the day in bed. Bartolo came to say hello, looking downcast. He reminded him that the party was coming to an end, and the guests would soon be leaving. Count Nelmar shook hands with Al's father and invited them to visit. Al promised that the next time they went to the capital, they would definitely visit. Before leaving, the Count remembered that Al was almost at the age when he had to appear at noble receptions. But, most likely, they would meet earlier. Jolena thanked them for their hospitality and invited them to her lands. Al's father agreed and promised that Al would be with them. The hero hoped it was just politeness, because Lenaria looked too happy. He glanced at them and smiled a little. The idea of being received by nobles seemed appealing. It would be nice if there were nice people there. Silvio looked around with admiration. The atmosphere was magical. But despite this, his brother was going to read in his room all day. Al couldn't believe his brother loved books so much. But Silvio believed that books opened up new worlds and shaped perspectives. Now the hero understood him. Lived experience is important, but stories also have their value. Al asked what his brother was reading, The Sea Princess and the Three Dragons. Al admitted that he had recently read it. Silvio was surprised, but asked not to spoil it. Al noticed that when the conversation turned to books, his brother would light up. He thought that his father's blood was stronger in his sister. But if you look closely, Silvio and his father did have some common traits. Silvio said that Al had more of his mother, just as cunning and unpredictable, and he added that at least he wasn't as evil. Then suddenly, his mother appeared. Al disappeared. He didn't seem to look any better than her. The older brother pulled him further, saying that people had already gathered somewhere ahead. Al noticed that there were more people today. After all, it was a banquet. The father doesn't mind. A holiday is about food, drinks, songs, and dancing around the fire. This time, the Lowlight family is taking care of everything. The food is free, and everything is organized at the highest level. This year they were supported by the trading company Tri, so the banquet became more magnificent. Al realized with horror that it was all thanks to the sales of the game Reversi. Even his clothes had become more luxurious. This scoundrel must be earning crazy amounts of money. He and Bartolo had suffered greatly because of this merchant. Silvio didn't know the details, but he asked his brother not to be angry. Today was a holiday. Al agreed. Yes, we should be happy, not angry. He shook his brother's hand and thanked him for the peace he brought. Silvio just smiled. Al took a deep breath, his mouth going dry. Silvio pointed to the fruit water cart, time to refresh himself. While Al and Silvio were walking, two shadows were furtively watching them from behind the houses. Al looks around, chewing on something tasty, and decides that his brother must be lost again. Behind them, girls' voices are heard, discussing a handsome blonde man holding the hand of a short, brown-haired boy. Al immediately guesses that they are talking about him and his brother. One of the girls mentions her husband, but the other one irritably brushes it off. First she needs to find that handsome guy, and the husband will wait. Al guesses that these girls were in the audience during Western's fight with Roland. It seems they remember them well. Instead of aimless searches, it's better to use women's gossip channels. They'll find out everything in an instant. The hero silently waves goodbye to them. Giving up on everything, Al decides to just move on. Sylvia would say that's heartless. One of the girls remembers that Nora saw them on the east side, and the whole company heads there. The girls run forward, stamping their feet happily, while Al, looking terrified, runs in the opposite direction. Somewhere in the crowd, Al hears a voice telling him to go west. He decides to listen. On the way, the headman greets him and asks how the festival went. Al smiles. Everything is great, the food is delicious, and the people are cheerful. Making his way through the crowd, the first thing he sees are two giant pairs of biceps. Before him is Wester. Al understands that another duel is about to take place. Roland versus Wester. The crowd marvels at their muscles. One man swears he'll bet a coin on Roland. Those biceps inspire confidence. Some even dream of being in the arms of such a giant. One of the spectators casts a sideways glance at his delighted neighbor. The stake is a silver coin. Al remembers how similar it was at the Reversi tournament. It seems like the locals like everything big. There is little entertainment in the village, so such spectacles are a real delight. Wester and Roland clasp hands and prepare for battle. The girls are already languishing. Sweat, muscles, breathing so close. Al just sighs. Nothing new. The guys agreed that this was something important to them. Al smiled wryly. In this world, it's better not to know everything. Finally, the referee blows the whistle, and the two giants clash with a scream. Al guesses that the rules among the girls have been established for a long time, but the boys are not told about it. Without stopping, he walks on. He notices a familiar blue hair in the crowd. The hero's eyes lit up. It was his sister Emma. One of the locals greets him, but he nearly stumbles and rushes after Emma, giving her a hasty, "Talk to you later." Peeking around the corner of the house, Al calls out for his sister. But as soon as he sees her, his smile disappears, giving way to the terror in his eyes. It looked like she was standing next to some guy. Al couldn't believe what he was seeing. The guy looked at Al and turned to Emma. Al wondered in surprise, how could he be so impudent on the first meeting? Emma asked Thor to hold back. The Lord's second son, Alfred, was in front of them. The guy was confused. He was such a big guy, but he looked like an ordinary idiot. Now Al realized who it was, the younger brother with the most strange behavior. Thor snaps. He doesn't care whose son is who. He doesn't like it, period. Emma grabs his cheek, and he screams, begging to stop. Emma's younger brother, Thor, apologized to Al, introduced himself and said he was 8. Al shook his hand, introduced himself as Alfred, and added that he was 6. He also had an older sibling. Thor immediately guessed who she was. The guy suddenly took Al aside and asked him to step aside for a while. The hero didn't understand anything, but agreed. When they were alone, Thor pinned Al against the wall, slammed his hand next to his face, and hung in suspense. He wanted to have a serious conversation, but he didn't know where to start. Al took it as a mockery. Thor's cheeks were burning. He was mumbling something, and Al asked him to speak more clearly. It turned out that Thor wanted to know if Leonora had a lover. Hearing this made Al's chest tighten, but he definitely couldn't let this guy get close to Leonora. He decided to tell the whole truth. Thor's eyes lit up at the thought of her. He thought she was incredibly cute. Al thought he was talking nonsense, but Thor advised him to look at himself from the outside. Maybe it would help. Al tried to explain that Leonora's appearance was deceptive. He didn't understand how Thor could think she was good. He admitted that his sister is the complete opposite of Emma. Thor, in turn, said that he simply had not seen his sister angry. With the last of his strength, Al explained that Leonora was hot-headed and cruel. Thor replied that Emma was no better, sloppy and absent-minded. Besides, she used to put cotton wool in her bra. But suddenly their argument was interrupted by female voices. The girls wanted to hear what they were talking about. The guys were petrified. Right in front of them stood a worn-out version of Silvio, with Leonora and Emma next to them. Silvio waved to his brother, and Al said he was looking for him. The hero was about to run away, but Leonora grabbed him by the collar and asked where he was going. Al was frightened, and thought that she was using her father's technique. Smiling, but no less threatening, Emma pulled Thor towards her. She must have heard the conversation about women's breasts, too. Leonora waved goodbye to Emma. They had business to attend to. Emma waved back. One of the locals noticed the feudal lord's children. From the outside, they seemed like perfect siblings. The woman sighed. Her children only quarreled. Al wanted to say that on the outside things were not as they seemed. He realized that he had started this conversation for nothing. There was nowhere to run. The village of Kolyat had a bright future. But his was unlikely to. Earlier at the festival, a strange situation had happened to him. He and Thor had been discussing the sisters, not even suspecting what lay ahead. The boys didn't know that their sisters were standing nearby and hearing everything. They were immediately taken home, but real hell awaited them. That day, Al's screams could be heard throughout the house. Leonora chose the most cruel punishment. She began to tickle him. Mom just smiled. The kids seemed to be getting along great. Even the maids were giggling from the squeals. In the end, Leonora let her brother go and hurried away. For Al, it was a disaster. He reached a place where many people had already gathered. A banquet was in full swing. The hero was happy. Everything was just beginning. And then he saw Thor, who shouted that he was late. Al smiled. "Thor is still alive." The boy made a serious face. He barely survived. They both started looking for their sisters. Al assumed that if he saw Emma, Leonora would be there. The girls usually went out together. Thor agreed, so we should go out in the evening, and suggested getting drunk. Al reminds them that they are still children. And in general, why did Thor decide that they were friends? But he replied, since they have already shared who they love, then they are friends. Al thought, and agreed. For the first time, Val had a friend his own age. What he felt for Emma wasn't love, more admiration. He looked at Thor, who was beaming with happiness at having someone to talk to. After a short conversation, Al suggested that perhaps he was being too annoying. Thor reminded him that he had never answered whether Leonora's younger sister had a boyfriend. Al came to his senses and said that not yet, although there had been rumors of a boyfriend. Thor, not knowing what to do, grabbed him by the shoulders. He started to shake him, but Al told him to calm down. Talking like that wouldn't work. Thor stopped and apologized. Al sighed heavily. It all happened 2 years ago. At a noble ball, a boy saw Leonora and fell in love at first sight. Thor wanted the details, but Al didn't know everything himself. Before the boy could say anything, Leonora drew her sword and pointed it at him. After that, she was no longer invited to balls, and there was no talk of marriage. She often repeated that she would never bind herself to someone weaker. Leonora was too strong, and Thor admitted that he had no chance. Al doubted that anyone in the world could beat his sister. He thought of Sheila, Sharia, and Carla. But they were all girls. Suddenly there was a wild excitement from the girls around as Roland undressed. Vester followed suit. Thor noticed that the adults were very noisy today, but Al said they were always like that. The hero had long understood that adults live in their own world, while children live in another. Thor completely agreed with him. After a pause, Thor gathered himself and exclaimed that he should have tried harder. That evening he decided to become stronger than Leonora. He might never be her equal in fencing, but never giving up was his motto. He wanted to be worthy of being among the best. Al smiled, looking at the serious Thor. If you're going to be like the strongest, then the path is to adventure. A week has passed since the harvest festival. Al looked out the window. It was cold outside. Days like these were best spent in bed with a book. The fire magic kept the room warm and cozy. With the arrival of spring, he decided to go out into the yard, lie down, read. When he wanted to eat, he would get food from the refrigerator using air magic. His new life was just a fairy tale. But suddenly a loud voice was heard calling Al to play. The hero spilled his tea in surprise and fell onto the bed. The voice came from the street. Al pretended not to hear anything. He was dreaming of peace and quiet. He was rarely alone, but Thor never stopped calling again. Angrily, Al opened the window. Thor shouted that he had something to tell him. Thor explained that adventurers are those who earn money by fulfilling orders, hunting monsters, accompanying nobles on their travels. He also searches for rare materials, herbs, and even explores forests, such as flora and other mysterious things. He suggested to Al that they become adventurers together. But Al immediately refused. He wanted a quiet life in the village. Thor just sighed. He had already foreseen this. But he noticed that Sister Emma was home now. Al instantly jumped up and asked to give him a minute. Something rumbled in the house. A few minutes later, the hero ran out and asked Emma to wait. But as soon as he left, he heard a strange sound in Leonora's room. He carefully opened the door. Al didn't immediately realize what had happened. His sister was lying on the floor,